service. Come help me now, I'm fucking nervous. I'm trying but can't scratch the surface. So I'll keep my mouth shut and not listen. Afraid I'd lose you if I didn't. Till we find what we're missing and compromise. So I'll keep my shoes on and not leaving. We're on thin ice, winter season. Can we find a single reason not to say goodbye? I don't wanna say anything, cause if I do I might say the wrong words. Oh no. So I'll keep my mouth shut and not listen. Afraid I'd lose you if I didn't. Till we find what we're missing and compromise. So I'll keep my shoes on and not leaving. We're on thin ice, winter season. Can we find a single reason not to say goodbye? Oh, if I said what's on my mind, would you stay with me tonight? If I said what's on my mind, would that make you run and hide? Run and hide. Run and hide. If I said what's on my mind, would that make you run and hide? Would that make you run and hide? Run and hide.
Systems, guidance, navigation, and control, communications are all functioning before we commit it to heading to the moon. And we do that with this, the trans-lunar injection. This will be about an 18-minute firing on today's timeline, and this is done to give us enough energy to get out of low Earth orbit and make our way to the moon. Shortly after that, the ICPS will separate. It'll do a disposal burn, sending it around the moon and into an orbit around the sun. But from there on out, propulsion duties get handed over to the European Service Module. It's going to make a couple of outbound trajectory correction burns on the way out, critically testing that orbital maneuvering system engine, that large one on the very bottom that's going to be needed when we start making our maneuvers around the moon to get into what's known as distant retrograde orbit, or DRO. To do that, we're going to do the outbound powered flyby, dipping in about 70 or 80 miles off the lunar surface, really pushing with that large engine. That's going to slingshot us around. We're going to do a final orbit insertion maneuver, and then we will be in DRO, distant retrograde orbit, this dotted line right here. Distant, we're about 40,000 miles off the lunar surface, and retrograde because the moon orbits the Earth in a counterclockwise fashion. We're going to be going clockwise, opposite retrograde. It's a very stable orbit, doesn't require a lot of energy to maintain your space there, really lets us put Orion through the paces, learn about using this spacecraft in deep space. But eventually it'll be time to come home. We'll fire up the engines once more, do a departure burn. This is what commits us from departing the moon and heading back home. We'll dip in close to the surface once more for the return powered flyby and execute correction burns on the return transit as we target a splashdown in the Pacific Ocean. Before that happens, the spacecraft separate. The European Service Module's job is done. It drops away to burn up, revealing the heat shield. This is goal number one for this flight, is testing that heat shield at lunar return velocities, because when we hit the upper atmosphere, we're going to be moving more than 20,000 can withstand that heat of re-entry. After it makes it through, parachutes deploy, Orion splashes down in the Pacific, a Navy ship and other recovery assets are standing by to pick it up out of the water and bring an end to the first mission in the Artemis program. So that's all still going to unfold. It all starts with launch today though, so let's get back to the countdown. Over to you, Megan.
Our return to the moon would not be possible without our partners across the country and the world. So joining us now is Frank Davina, head of ESA's European Astronaut Center. Good evening to you.
Good evening.
Well, so I want to ask you, talk to me about Airbus and how that company and ESA contributed to the Orion spacecraft.
Well, Airbus is of course the lead manufacturer and integrator of the service module of our Orion capsule, and that will fly to the moon. So this is a very important part, of course, because without the service module, it's clear that we would not get to the moon or would not be able to return from it. So it's a very important partner for ESA, but there are industries across Europe, not only Airbus, but across Europe that are contributing to the service module in Italy, in France, Belgium. Really, it's a really European project.
Yeah.
Frank, we've been close partners, NASA and the European Space Agency, for decades now, and partnering on things like the space station, scientific exploration, and of course commercial crew missions. Matthias Maurer, ESA astronaut extraordinaire, was on my crew, Crew 3. Can you tell us a little bit more about what makes these partnerships so important?
Well, it's important, these partnerships, because we want to do sustainable exploration of the moon. We want to explore space on a sustainable way. And I think partnerships in that sense are essential. One nation alone, could they do it? The US maybe, yes. Europe certainly could not participate to a lunar program by themselves or could not do it by themselves. But I think if we do it as a partnership, we can go a lot further, we can do a lot more. We can leverage technologies, we can leverage talent in all these countries across the globe that can really push the partnership forward.
So looking ahead to future Artemis missions, we're going to have ESA astronauts on board those. Have you guys begun preparing for that training, anything like that?
We have actually started preparing already for lunar missions, surface missions. We have a program called And this logistics capability that will be a big part of the integrated Artemis program will allow us to have European astronauts actually walking on the moon. So that is really interesting for us.
Wow, Frank, thank you so much, and we continue to look forward to the contributions that we can make together with this partnership. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me, and good morning to the viewers in Europe.
Thank you so much. All right, and speaking of viewers, we have a ton of people out here on along the space coast of Florida watching today's launch. So let's head on over to NASA's Leah Martin. She's over at the Visitor Center with a whole bunch of excited people.
Oh my goodness, Megan. You know, this normally is a time of night that people are winding down and getting ready for bed, but there is not a single person here who has sleep on their mind. Everybody is so excited, on the edge of their seat, trading stories, talking about previous launches and being excited for this one. And I'm actually joined here by three women who are thrilled to come out and watch tonight's launch. What does it mean to be out here and see this historic launch tonight?
It's an amazing moment. I grew up on the Space Coast watching launches, and so to be out here tonight, it's incredible. It's an amazing feeling to be out with all of these people celebrating, and we're super excited to be here.
And Isabel, I know that you said that you have been having your eyes on this launch. You've been watching on the previous attempts. What does it mean for you to be here tonight?
Well, yeah, this is our third attempt here. We were here the first and second here at Banana Creek, so we're really excited. The energy out here is electrifying, and we can't wait to see this thing go up.
Now, this is the first of a series of missions that are becoming increasingly more complex. What are you most excited about for the Artemis missions?
Leah, I am so excited to be here. I just feel so honored because, as you know, this isn't just a momentous launch for humanity as a whole. It's so important for gender and cultural minorities across the globe because Artemis is landing the first woman and the first person of color on the surface of the moon. This is this generation's Apollo. And so all of the people who didn't have the opportunity to live through Apollo and be inspired by that have the opportunity today to witness it. And I'm just so grateful to be here. I can't wait to see the positive impact.
One more question. This is going to be something that you guys, I'm sure, will remember for your entire lives. How are you marking this? Do you have any special plans of capturing these memories and being able to pass them on to people in your life?
Well, my son is growing up here. I didn't grow up here, and so he's going to grow up here on the Space Coast, and I just can't wait for him to just grow up with the Artemis missions.
Well, Megan, we're out here. We have our eye to the sky, and we can't wait to see it go. Back to you.
Really great interviews, and wow, I saw that drone shot that we had showing all of the bleachers filled with people there to watch the launch. That was incredible. If you're just joining us, welcome to NASA's live launch coverage of Artemis 1, our return to the moon in almost 50 years. I'm NASA's Megan Cruz, and this is NASA astronaut Kayla Barron, who flew on NASA's SpaceX Crew 3 mission and returned home earlier this year after living and working on the International Space Station for about 6 months. I gotta ask you, how was that experience?
It was incredible. We had such an amazing time up there. The Expedition 66 crew was awesome. I've been saying since I got back that we're the happiest crew in the history of the space station, and nobody's been able to really challenge me on that yet.
You guys look very happy in that photo.
Oh man, we were just like a family up there executing an incredible mission. Some amazing science experiments. We got to do 3 spacewalks. It was just, you couldn't have planned a perfect first mission for me, Matthias, and Raja, and of course our veterans up there, Mark and Tom. It was amazing. We had an incredible time.
Yeah. Wow, look at that photo of you in the cupola. That is amazing.
Yeah, the views are beautiful. It's just like every time you look out the window, it takes your breath away.
Wow. And now here you are adding some valuable insight into Artemis 1. This is our third opportunity to launch NASA's brand new Space Launch System rocket and Orion spacecraft. This is an uncrewed flight test to pave the way for future crewed missions, starting with Artemis 2. And Kayla, you could be chosen to fly on some of those future missions. How does that make you feel?
Honestly, it's a little unbelievable to me. I could barely imagine what it'd be like to go to the space station until I did it. And just thinking about what it would be like to look back at the Earth from orbit around the moon or even standing on the moon kind of blows my mind.
Wow.
So yeah, it's hard to even imagine that that's true, but it's a really special time to be at NASA and an even more special time to be in the astronaut office.
Yeah, that's a beautiful picture of you seeing the moon, right?
Yeah, that's sort of a moon spotting adventure there. I've got binoculars. One thing that's really cool about seeing stars and the moon from orbit is you're not looking at them through the atmosphere. So you get these very clear views.
Oh.
And the moon is always super spherical. You never get these sort of slices that look kind of flat from Earth. Up there, you see it in 3D, it feels like.
Wow.
So yeah, I think we all sort of fall in love with the moon from space in a whole new way.
Yeah. Well, today's launch attempt comes amid a very busy year for us at NASA. Some of the highlights include 2 more commercial crew launches with SpaceX, Crew 4 in April, you're seeing there, and Crew 5 last month. In May, NASA and Boeing flew OFT-2, the second uncrewed flight test of the Starliner capsule. The goal is to certify the capsule for regular flights to the International Space Station after a crewed flight test next year. In July, we released the first images captured by our James Webb Space Telescope, and wow, they are magnificent. Pictures like these could help us answer some of astronomy's biggest questions about how our universe began. And then in September, we intentionally slammed the DART spacecraft into asteroid Dimorphos and successfully changed its course. The asteroid wasn't headed for Earth, that's important to say, but the test was to show that we could defend our planet if needed. And recently, 2 other missions that benefit the Artemis program. Last week, we tested a new inflatable heat shield that could help us eventually land humans on Mars. And just 2 days ago, Capstone arrived at its intended orbit around the moon. The small satellite launched from New Zealand in June and will now test the unique lunar orbit for a future space station there. You heard us talk about a gateway. Now, Kayla, what do you think about all that NASA is accomplishing?
I mean, those are all just amazing examples
Right?
of why it's such a cool time to be part of human spaceflight and the larger space program. We're learning so much, not only about our home planet, but our galaxy and the universe. Like those James Webb images just capture my imagination every time they release a new set.
Yes.
And so it's, we have a lot going on and a lot to be excited about right now.
I hope people are following along for it because it is truly great, and we want people to share along with that. So, all right, 1 hour, 6 minutes and counting from liftoff of Artemis 1. Let's head back to the Launch Control Center with Daryl Nail.
Yeah, thanks, Megan. And so we get an update for you now. The Red Crew, of course, completed its work on torquing down the bolts for that replenish valve on the core stage hydrogen side. And now we are back in replenish for core stage hydrogen, which is good news. The team now looking to work on that upper stage, and we understand for the update to the NASA test director, they just informed the NTD that they can start getting back the flow on the upper stage as well. It went into a stop flow roughly around 10 p.m. Eastern time after a leak was detected. You can see the core stage status there. Liquid oxygen side is in stable replenish, both for the core stage and the upper stage of the rocket. Over on the right side, you can see we've lost some hydrogen since going into a stop flow that allowed some liquid hydrogen to boil off during about an hour or so while a Red Crew was sent out to the launch pad to make repairs. Now, the hydrogen bleed for the engines was reestablished, and it looks like the team is back on track to recover that after a stop flow halted the bleed. They are required to bleed that liquid hydrogen through the RS-25 engines for 90 minutes, but they're picking up where they left off, and that appears to be on track. In the meantime, we've had an update from the range, and the range has informed the NASA test director that currently at the moment, if we were to launch now, they are no-go due to the loss of signal on a radar site. That's currently being worked right now. Again, the range advising the NASA test director that they are no-go. The range is not clear for launch until they remedy that issue on their radar site. And so we're also tracking that. In the meantime, we started this at 3:23 p.m. Eastern Time. Got the core stage tanked in about 4 hours and 23 minutes, and now looking to get everything back on track to try to make that launch window at 1:04 a.m. Eastern Time, which has a 2-hour window associated with it, all the way to 3 a.m. Eastern Time. That's the latest from the firing room. Megan, back to you.
Thank you, Daryl. Now, there may not be astronauts aboard the Orion spacecraft for this flight test, but there are some passengers there with very important missions.
Inside the Orion spacecraft, as we fly around the moon, we have some cool experiments going on to help us understand what the environment is like.
Although there's no humans aboard Artemis 1, we do have a few special passengers aboard that will help us pave the way for future Artemis missions.
So there's basically 3 occupants riding. You can kind of think about it like 3 astronauts. We have a moonikin. We will also have 2 torsos that are learning about the moon and learning about the environment for our astronauts before they go.
We have a mannequin on Artemis 1. We call him our moonikin for short.
That moonikin is called Commander Moonikin Campos.
The name is actually in homage to Arturo Campos,
who was an important person who helped bring the Apollo 13 capsule home. The moonikin will sit in the commander's seat, and it will wear a suit just like our astronauts will wear.
Moonican Compost is actually weighted to simulate an actual human aboard the Orion spacecraft.
So it will help us understand what our astronauts will experience as they go to the moon and home.
The Orion Crew Survival System suit and the Orion seat were designed simultaneously to fit together as a seamless package. The actual design of the suit was built into the Orion seat such that when they're in the suit, in the seat, it is a true cocoon of protection for them. During this test flight, the seat will actually be instrumented with accelerometers.
Sensors that tell us how much the chair is shaking during launch and re-entry and how many G-forces or gravitational forces it experiences.
We expect Commander Moonican Compost to have a very exciting ride on his way to orbit. The thrill of launch, the experience of weightlessness, the excitement of landing. What we learn on Artemis 1 with our mannequins assistants will help us better understand how a human will actually behave in the seat, both for landing and for launch to allow us to ensure their safety.
In addition to the Moonican, we'll have two seats that have basically what's like a human dummy, an upper torso that are detecting how much radiation they're experiencing.
It's called the Matryoshka Astrorad Radiation Experiment, MARE. MARE is an international collaboration with German Aerospace Center, DLR, and with Israel Space Agency. The MARE experiment consists of two anthropomorphic phantoms called Helga and Zohar that are simulating a female body in a space radiation environment.
One of those will be wearing a safety vest,
The Astrorad radiation vest.
that we hope will help protect our astronauts from radiation.
Each one of the two phantoms will be equipped with about 20 battery-operated radiation instruments.
So between the two, we'll be able to determine how well we can protect our astronauts from radiation events.
Space radiation is a mix of high-energy, heavy-charged particles that originate from the sun. To put things in perspective, 1 year of Earth exposure to cosmic rays is equivalent with 1 day of space radiation exposure in deep space. The purpose of the MARE experiment is to learn more about the radiation exposure as well as the biological effects of different organs.
So basically, it's like we have 3 occupants inside Orion that are learning about the moon and learning about the environment for our astronauts before they go.
Going back to the moon with new exploration goals and new technologies will help us gain better understanding of the challenges we encounter with deep space exploration.
We will have to develop new technology and solutions to meet really difficult challenges. But that's what NASA does. That's what Artemis is all about.
And we have one more passenger to tell you about. It's everyone's favorite Beagle that's had a special connection with NASA ever since Apollo.
Artemis is NASA's plan to go back to the moon, and Snoopy is to be the zero gravity indicator.
A zero-G or zero gravity indicator demonstrates the moment that the crew in the spacecraft reach weightlessness.
Snoopy is about to take his first trip around the moon.
The relationship with NASA and Snoopy goes back about 50 years since the Apollo days.
He was the face of the safety campaign,
the icon for NASA's culture of safety and mission success. So NASA and Peanuts have a Space Act agreement.
And we collaborate together on STEM content. And we really were excited when it was decided that Snoopy would be the zero gravity indicator on Artemis 1. We wanted to go all out, so we created a custom Snoopy.
And the spacesuit is actually made out of material worn by the NASA astronauts.
Everything was done with extreme detail. They cut patterns for his suit, even how his collar worked and how the NASA Meatball logo looked.
We're very excited. I'm personally very excited.
I can't contain the excitement I am feeling about this day. Snoopy is going farther in space than he's ever been before.
This is a day that we've all been waiting for. It's fantastic.
And we snapped this picture of Snoopy and Orion. He's comfortable and ready for his journey to the moon. Lucky for us that Snoopy has this twin that's staying here on Earth. That way we can take a closer look at how cute he is. And this orange suit, I mean, it is amazing. It's actually the same material that would be worn by Artemis astronauts, right?
Yeah, the suits we'll be wearing in Artemis ultimately are an update of the suits that the shuttle crews wore. They're this iconic orange color, and we've updated them though with new technologies and also new crew capabilities so that they can best protect the crew in our return to the moon. I actually got to work with that suit team before my assignment,
that's cool.
And so the suit's kind of near and dear to my heart.
Yeah, I think we have a picture of you wearing the suit as part of when you were helping to design it, right?
Yeah, so I was our representation from the crew office, from the astronaut office, to the engineering team that's working on putting this suit together. So I got the chance to wear it for some of the early testing, and it is an amazing suit, and it'll protect us while we're in the vehicle.
Cool. So what was your zero-G indicator?
Yeah, like the video mentioned, we always choose stuffed animals. So we actually had a turtle. We named her Pfau, which is German for peacock. And we chose that because Raj and I are from the turtle training class. So we thought it would be fun to have a sea turtle as our zero-G indicator. But we wanted to have a nod to Matthias, who is a German astronaut, so that's why we gave her a German name, and Tom, who's from the peacock class. So she's peacock colored, and it kind of worked for everybody.
I was about to ask, I was like, wait, why is it German for peacock, but it's a turtle?
Yeah, exactly.
Now I get
it. Was diplomacy, crew diplomacy move.
Now I get it. So we had turtle, we have Snoopy here. Why is it always toys?
I think the tradition goes back to crews taking stuffed animals from their children and sometimes flying the stuffed animals of their kids. That still happens to this day when a crew selects a zero-G indicator, but they're convenient because they're nice and soft. So if you're going to allow something to bounce around in the capsule, you want to make sure that it won't hurt the crew or any of the equipment.
And they're cute. I mean,
yeah.
Come on.
Who doesn't want a
Makes
mascot?
you smile, yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, NASA's workforce has changed over the last 50 years. For Artemis 1 today, women make up 30% of the launch team. But when we first stepped on the moon with Apollo 11 in 1969, take a look at this picture here. You see this woman highlighted near the center there? That's going to be Joanne Morgan, and she was the only woman in the firing room. She now has a special message for the Artemis generation.
Hello, I'm Joanne Morgan, and I am so excited for Artemis 1. This flight test will bring new knowledge to people on Earth, and I'm thrilled to see such a diverse team at the LCC making it happen. Firing Room 1 is a different sight today than when I was on console for Apollo 11. I was totally focused on doing my job and never thought about being the only woman in the room. Today, women at NASA are center directors and launch and flight directors and have substantial roles in engineering, science, and technical areas. This is so important for a new generation, the Artemis generation, to see how individuals are leaders and contributors to the mission, and for youth across America and the planet to see this as well. After 50 years, it is gratifying to see this change, and I can't wait to see what you all accomplish together. New century, new generation, new mission to the moon and beyond. Godspeed, Artemis team and Artemis 1.
I think it's so great that we know she's following along and interested in this mission too.
Yeah, it's so awesome to see the women who have come before us at NASA and paved the way for a much more diverse team to contribute to these amazing missions.
Yeah, and speaking of women breaking the mold, before serving as a NASA astronaut, I know you were a naval officer and a member of the first class of women commissioned to the submarine community. How amazing is that? I mean, what would you say as you look at these pictures? What would you say to women, young girls who might be thinking, hey, I might want to join a predominantly male field?
Yeah, I was just really lucky to be in the right place at the right time. I was a senior at the Naval Academy when they announced that they were going to change the policy and allow us to serve aboard submarines. But even before that change happened, I knew that I was passionate about serving in that role and I was dreaming about it. So I think allowing yourself to really examine what your passions are and be brave enough to dream that you could actually do those things. I had awesome mentors who encouraged me along the way and told me never close a door on yourself. You always want to put yourself in the roles you're most passionate about, especially if you're going to challenge yourself. Doing something you love that's hard is so much better than doing something that you're not as well suited to. So I was just lucky I had some awesome leaders in my life who encouraged me to be brave enough to dream so that when those opportunities presented themselves, I was ready to take them on.
Yeah, no, that's great. Having mentors is always so important because, yes, sometimes you don't know what path to take, especially if you're blazing your own. So it's always so nice to have somebody to talk through some of that.
Absolutely.
52 minutes until the opening of the 2-hour window for Artemis 1 today. Once it soars off the launch pad, our colleagues over in Houston will take over. Leah, how are things looking in mission control right now?
Hey Megan, I'm here now, and thanks for joining us again here in the White Flight Control Room here at NASA's Johnson Space Center. So you might be wondering why Johnson Space Center will control the flight of Orion after liftoff, even though it's launching at Kennedy Space Center, and that's all about how our flight control centers are designed. Launch control is at Kennedy, while mission control is in Houston, and we also have the SLS Engineering Support Center at NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center. Ever since the Gemini 4 mission in 1965, all flights have been commanded from Houston after launch, so we have the infrastructure and the experience here at Johnson Space Center to work through long-duration missions with, or in this case, without crew. Additionally, launches must be conducted over water rather than over populated areas, which makes Kennedy Space Center a prime location. Again, we're ready to jump into action once SLS takes flight, and this room will be staffed around the clock until Orion splashes down at the end of the mission. We're excited to continue that work today with Artemis 1 and throughout the Artemis program, but for now, we'll turn it back over to you, Megan and Kayla.
Now, the fully stacked SLS and Orion system was rolled from the vehicle assembly building to the launch pad about 2 weeks ago. We captured this video of the 4-mile, 9-hour journey. It took a special transporter and a special team of people to make it happen. Hear from them what it's like to shoulder the weight of this moment.
The crawler transporter is a machine that goes and picks up the mobile launcher, the SLS rocket with Orion. It's basically the cornerstone of the mobile launch concept. Without the crawler, you couldn't transport the mobile launcher and the vehicle from the VAB to the pad or the pad back to the VAB. And it was designed and built for the Apollo program to move Saturn V's to the launch pad. Since then, we've modified it and used it to move the entire shuttle program. And after the shuttle program, we did extensive modifications, and now it's to be used to move Artemis to the launch pad. The crawler is 136 feet long from end to end. It's 114 feet wide from the edge of the truck to the other edge of the truck. It weighs 6.6 million pounds. It has the power to do 2 miles an hour, but you never want to go that fast. Generally, we're around 0.83 for SLS. Artemis will be one of the heaviest loads we've ever carried and one of the tallest loads we've carried. I am exceptionally proud of our team. They're very talented, they're very committed, and they're just all around good team. I think any problem that crops up or anything that comes up, we'll fix it and we'll get moving again. And again, it starts right here with the crawler. So if we do our job and everybody else does theirs, man, we're gonna have a successful launch. We're going back to the moon. This is gonna be just fantastic.
Such an impressive team, and the crawler, Kayla. I mean, this is a certificate from the Guinness Book of World Records.
Yeah, it's pretty cool getting recognized for the heaviest self-powered vehicle in the world at 3,106 tons.
That's amazing.
It's amazing.
I know. We were just talking about how awesome the crawler is. I mean, it was retrofitted. It was created in the Apollo for the Apollo missions, and it was updated, modified for shuttle, and now it's been modified for Artemis. It's just really an amazing machine, and the people who keep it maintained and operate it. Like, I'm so glad that we could feature them today.
Absolutely.
All right, so we are 48 minutes and counting again from that opening of the 2-hour window we have today. Kayla, if you thought you were excited, you have got to check out this video here.
This is really cool. We got some children that are on a bus, and they're going to come here to the vehicle assembly building, and the administrator and I are going to jump on the bus and surprise them.
We're going to give them the opportunity to come in and go up the elevator with the rocket.
Wow! It's so cool!
Look at that thing! Whoa, that's awesome!
Hey guys, would you like to see a moon rocket? Because it is the future of our country, indeed the future of the world. And we saw what our space program does for science and technology and engineering and mathematics. We saw that in the Apollo generation.
All right, guys, what do you think? What I hope to achieve today is inspiring a new generation. I mean, the more people that we can get to see up close and personal this rocket, it's awe-inspiring. And I cannot wait till the launch. When America sees our rocket actually launch on a test flight to the moon, you know, it's just going to spark a whole new push for what we are doing.
Best day of my whole life ever. It's gonna be incredible. It was a dream come true.
This rocket is definitely going to the moon.
I think it's really amazing.
And I was actually really excited because I've never seen a rocket like this close up.
Now we have the Artemis generation. This is a new generation of us going back to the moon to learn and live, and then we're going to Mars.
I told you they were so excited. They're so cute. Their faces. It was amazing.
I think my face looked pretty similar the first time I walked into the VAB and looked up at that rocket. I mean, the building is huge, and standing at the base of the rocket just takes your breath away. The scale of it, you know, 322 feet, especially stacked on its end like that, is just amazing. So yeah. I almost relived my first time in the VAB through their eyes.
And it was really cool. There was this opportunity where they got to just ask any questions they wanted. I was there, so they were asking me questions. They were asking the administrator, Bob Cabana as well, and they just hands shot up. They just had questions, and then sometimes I didn't really know the answer, and they're like, well, it's this, and I was like, oh my God, they know so much, and they're so interested in it. I mean, again, this is why we're doing this. This is part of the inspiring the next generation.
Absolutely. Whenever I get a chance to interact with kids kind of any age, all the way from elementary school up through college, the human spaceflight program, and Artemis in particular, I think really captures people's imagination and gets them interested in everything it takes to do something so daring and so complicated.
Yeah. And actually, before we move on, an interesting note about the opening music in that video. It's an original composition called The Artemis Generation, performed by the Cooper Middle School Band percussion section of McLean, Virginia. And to continue to inspire the Artemis generation, NASA invited students to take part in a national essay contest, challenging them to imagine what it'd be like to lead a week-long mission to the moon's South Pole. Here's the first winner now.
I gazed out of our moon pod window just before it was time to exit. My crew of 3 and I had been working for years to get here. Our crew consisted of a botanist, an engineer, a doctor, and me, an astrobiologist. We'd been picked because of how well we got along together, with our complementary STEM backgrounds and our naturally upbeat personalities. Houston, this is Artemis Crew 1, initiating airlock sequence, I said over my microphone. I looked at my crewmates, and as I stepped out of the pod, I felt so gratified, becoming the first woman on the moon. Our purpose was to set up a moon habitat containing the 4 things needed to keep a crew safe: oxygen and clean water, a waste disposal system, the veggie project for food, and a protective outside shell made of regolith and mycelium. We will build it over the next week, and it will be used by other astronauts for years to come. Embarking on this incredible adventure, I couldn't help but be grateful to be given this opportunity to lead the most remarkable crew and to know that I was a part of the Artemis generation.
So that was beautifully written by Taya Sauer of Laguna, California, and she was one of 3 essay winners. The 2 others were Austin Pritz of Walcott, Indiana, and Amanda Gutierrez of Lincoln, Nebraska. If you want to check out their essays, you can scan the QR code you see on the screen. The 3 of them beat out nearly 14,000 students who submitted essays, so you definitely want to check out the other 2, again, by scanning this QR code. So right now you're looking live at right outside of Kennedy Space Center's visitor complex. We have plenty of bleachers set out to accommodate, as you can see, a lot of guests that are hoping to see the launch today. So why don't we go in there and check back in with NASA's Leo Martin.
Hi, Megan. Yeah, this place is filling up. You can feel the excitement, people chattering, people sharing stories, people talking. And, you know, we just heard about those Artemis Moonpod essay winners who are part of the Artemis generation. Also joining me tonight from the Artemis generation, we have 2 students who were actually able to come down and visit at Kennedy Space Center to watch this launch live tonight. I'm joined here by Denham and Allison. How does it feel to be here tonight?
Really, when I first found out, I was really nervous. I didn't really know what to expect. Like, we really just looked at each other and we kind of screamed.
Yeah. Just out of excitement?
Yeah.
How did you feel?
Honestly, it was like amazing. It was surreal. Like that we have this opportunity out of so many people who applied for this. It was like outstanding.
And you guys actually got to take a tour of Kennedy Space Center a little bit earlier this week. What was something that you got to see that was just really outstanding?
I think it was the shuttle experience, like how it is when the rocket ship goes on up with people in it. It was honestly really fun doing it and learning like how they feel at the moment.
And Denham, what do you think it will be like to watch the world's most powerful rocket launch tonight from just across the river?
Well, really, I don't really know what to expect because I've never really done this before, but I feel like it would really be outstanding. I might shed a little tear, but I don't really know. Like, I'm really excited to be here, and it's amazing. Like,
it is amazing, and I don't think you're going to be the only one shedding tears tonight. Megan, we're super excited, eyes on Artemis, and we're ready to see the launch.
Thanks so much, guys. Now, Kayla, are you ready for more questions from social media? We're getting them in.
Always.
All right, let's take a look at the screen now. We have another celebrity question.
Hey, I'm Keke Palmer, and I play Izzy Hawthorne in Pixar's Lightyear, and I can't wait to see Artemis 1 launch today. How will going back to the moon pave the way to Mars?
Thank you, Keke.
Yeah, what an awesome question for tonight. I mean, the return to the moon is going to give us a chance to test all of the capabilities we need to operate on Mars. Mars is really far from home. It's going to take us 6 months just to get there, and that's with ideal planetary alignment and expected advances in propulsion technology. Then we'll spend about a year plus on the surface before it's 6 months home. And so the moon is a lot closer. We can get there in 3 days. The communications delay is a lot shorter, and so we can really test our operational concepts a lot closer to home. The moon's super far away. It's 250,000 miles, but that's way closer than Mars. So it's going to give us a chance to test all of our technologies so that we know what we need to develop in order to take that next step.
Yeah, we call it the next giant step for a reason. Mars is very, very far, like you said. All right, let's take another question from social media. Kayla, what inspired you to be an astronaut?
You know, my journey was a little bit different than some of my colleagues. I didn't grow up specifically dreaming of becoming an astronaut. I don't know what the barrier was there. I was aware of and inspired by the space program, but I never allowed myself to dream of becoming an astronaut until I had served on a submarine, actually. I think that operational experience that's so similar to what we do in the space program, if you think about it, we're sending humans to live, work, and do something of importance in a place where people aren't supposed to be, the depths of the ocean or the vacuum of space. And so I think those experiences gave me the confidence to even dream that I could become an astronaut, and then inspired me to apply in the first place.
And that doesn't deter you, again, like being in a place where, yeah, we're not supposed to be, a confined space at that.
Yeah, I think those parallels, I got a chance to meet an astronaut after serving on my submarine, Kay Heyer, who's also a Naval Academy graduate, class of 1981. And hearing about her experiences working on the space station really made me click. All of a sudden I said, the space station's a submarine in space.
Yes.
And it sounds silly, but I had never made that connection before. And once I did, I just couldn't stop dreaming about it.
Oh, that's so cool. I love that your story isn't, the typical one, as you said. Okay, I think we have time for one more question. Is Snoopy ready and excited?
Of course. I think like any crew member, Snoopy's been training for this moment. He knows what to expect in a nominal and an off-nominal launch and all the actions expected of him. So like any good crew member, he's ready to go.
And he has a suit that's been tailored to him. It's especially made for him, the way that the astronaut suits are especially made for them. So yeah, I think he's ready.
Yeah, seeing the moon up close, he's ready to go.
So keep those questions coming. Use that hashtag Artemis and tweet or drop them in the comments wherever you're watching this broadcast. And don't forget those NASA Moon Snaps. Hashtag NASA Moon Snap for your moon-inspired content. Okay, we are now 37 minutes from the opening of our 2-hour launch window today. Let's check back in with Daryl with the launch team.
Yeah, we've had a couple of issues that the launch team has been working, and we have an update on both of those. First of all, is the leak, the liquid hydrogen leak in the replenish valve out at the mobile launcher. We understand from the launch team that that leak has not recurred. The work that happened out at the pad is that the red crew and the work that they did out there remedied the leak. That's good news. And now the liquid hydrogen tank on the core stage is back in replenish at this moment. And the upper stage of the rocket, liquid hydrogen side, is in fast fill. You can see from the graphic there that we are back up to 100% over on the liquid hydrogen side on the right hand of the screen. On the left hand of the screen, you can see we have been in stable replenish for liquid oxygen. Now, with regards to the range, they reported that they had an issue to the NASA test director with their radar sight. Later found out that that was actually a bad Ethernet switch that was cutting out and not providing them the data. The range reported that they will swap out that bad switch, and they're currently working on that. They advised at the time, about a half hour ago, that it would take them about 70 minutes, or about 25 minutes into that work. They did just recently update the NASA test director to say that it's going to take them a little bit longer because they're going to need to re-verify this Ethernet equipment once they have it installed. Again, that work is ongoing, but at the moment, if we were launching right now, the range is no-go as a result of that bad Ethernet switch. The Dolly Lou file, which helps steer the Space Launch System through the upper atmosphere, has been uploaded to the rocket, and so we're good to go there in terms of other configurations that are ongoing. But we are continuing to monitor communications of the launch team about holding to the top of the window, currently slated for 1:04 a.m. Eastern Time. But we do have 2 hours, and we have yet to see whether or not the launch team is going to be able to make enough adjustments in order to hit the top of that window. No slip yet, but we're monitoring their work, and we'll give you an update when we have it. Back to you, Megan.
Thank you, Daryl. Really great news about that leak. Kayla and I actually said, wow, that's really great news. So we'll wait on your next update. Let's go back live now to Kennedy Space Center's visitor complex, where we have NASA's Dan Hewitt inside there with our new moon board. Dan, let's focus in on Orion now. It has 3 main elements, right?
That's right, Megan. And Orion is the spacecraft that's going to be carrying our Artemis astronauts off of planet Earth and then returning them home. As you said, 3 major components, so we'll jump in here at the top with the first one, the launch abort system. This is a critical safety feature on Orion, designed to pull the capsule away from the SLS stack in the event of an emergency on the pad or the way uphill. And it does that using 3 solid rocket motors. The first one, the abort motor, can fire within milliseconds of automatically detecting an issue, pulling the capsule away to a safe distance. After that, the attitude adjustment motor. This one will fire. We can cancel out any rates, put us into a nice stable glide before we get ready to fire the jettison motor. This is the one that will actually take the launch abort system off of Orion, allowing it to then deploy parachutes and parachute down to safety. I will note the jettison motor, the only one that fires no matter what on a normal mission. It's going to fire once we're high enough in the atmosphere. And for Artemis 1, that is the only motor on this that is active. The attitude and abort motors are inert for Artemis 1. And that's all focused on protecting this, the Orion Crew Module. This is where you have your astronauts physically inside. In the capsule, you have everything you need to keep a crew safe, happy, healthy, thriving in deep space. You have a pressurized environment, seats, crew displays, toilet, everything that you need. On the outside, couple of critical features. On the bottom, the heat shield. Remember, this is goal number 1 for this mission, is testing that heat shield. It's an ablative structure made to survive that fiery re-entry at the end of a mission. Along the outside, you see these small gray circles. Those are reaction control system thrusters. Orion can use that at the very end to control the yaw, pitch, and roll as it's hurtling through the atmosphere. We have windows. You need windows to look outside. 2 on the front, 2 on the sides, 1 in the side hatch, 1 up top in the very top docking hatch. Those are different layers of glass and acrylics for pressure and thermal control. We have a docking system, an uprighting system, parachutes, all for the very end of the mission. Third and final piece, down here at the bottom, the European Service Module. This has all of the propulsion assets for after SLS has done its job. Starting on the bottom, the large orbital maneuvering system engine. This is the one that's providing the most thrust for all of those key maneuvers around the moon. 8 auxiliary thrusters also around the aft to the bottom part of the service module to provide some additional push as well. And then 24 of these smaller reaction control system thrusters. They can be used for attitude control, which way you're pointing, as well as small translational maneuvers moving side to side. We flip the vehicle up, we see 4 solar arrays, each one 24 feet in length, altogether generating 11 kilowatts of electrical power for Orion systems. Inside the service module, you have tanks for things like the thermal control system, potable water when we have a crew on board, and also pressurized oxygen and nitrogen for an atmosphere, which gets fed through this umbilical here to the crew module, along with electrical lines. That's also what's going to separate us at the very end of the mission. So that's Orion. It's going to be making its first flight around the moon on Artemis 1. Can't wait to see it, taking those selfies around our lunar neighbor. Send it back over to you, Megan.
Thanks, Dan. That last component Dan talked about, the European Service Module provided by the European Space Agency. Let's go to Jasmine for that.
Thank you, Megan. We are back in Firing Room 2 with the Launch Control Center, and joining us now is Philippe Delou, ESA's Program Manager for the Orion European Service Module. You have quite the title there, a big title for a big job, I'm sure. We are very glad to have you here, and we understand that the European Service Module is powering Orion that's going to send humanity farther than ever before. Philippe, how is it getting us there?
Yeah, thank you. Good evening, everyone. So yes, the service module accommodates the propulsion system that contains among the tanks and the pressurization of the system the engine. All the engines, 33 engines in total, among which the main engine, which is going to perform the burns to put Orion into the moon orbit and then back on the trajectory to return to Earth. The other engines are used for attitude correction during, attitude control and trajectory correction during the travel to the moon. In addition to the propulsion system, the service module generates the power and distributes the electricity to the crew module and the service module equipment so that they can operate. And the third function is the thermal control of the system. The service module accommodates radiators to reject the heat that is produced by all the equipment and the crew that will eventually be in the Orion. Finally, not on Artemis 1, but on future Artemis mission, it will have tanks to store the crew consumable, the water, the oxygen, and the nitrogen.
Right. So we understand, too, that you are monitoring launch here in Firing Room 2 with us. And you also have a team. We're going to bring up a picture of that team right now, or a live look inside ESA's control room in the Netherlands. So can you tell us, what is your team working on today?
Yes. Well, the ESA team is not only back in the Netherlands. It's one aspect, but we have also a significant team in the control room in Johnson, in the MER control room. And their role is to monitor the telemetry from the service module to make sure that all parameters are within their nominal behavior, that the operations are performed also nominally, and for sure identify if something goes wrong, if something goes not nominal. And If something non-nominal is identified, then they will have the role to support the NASA team to troubleshoot the anomaly and prepare the recommendation to be brought to the mission management team for a decision on how to operate the vehicle forward.
Great. We're really glad to hear that your teams are monitoring here, Johnson in the Netherlands as well. And this has been a huge collaboration. There were 10 countries that contributed to the European Service Module. Can you tell me about that teamwork?
Indeed, it was a real teamwork of about 60 companies across 10 European countries. Well, together with the prime contractor, we have selected the finest companies available in Europe to build the state-of-the-art equipment which is needed to go back to the moon with humans.
Right, we're going back to the moon and farther even beyond. Thank you so much, Philippe. I really appreciate you being here tonight.
You're welcome. Thank you very much.
Of course, of course. Megan, back to you.
Now it's time to check back in with Mission Control in Houston. Leah, how are things over there?
Things are good over here at Johnson Space Center, which is just one part of an agency-wide effort with many NASA programs doing their part to make future missions a reality. When the first woman and first person of color travel to the moon, they'll be wearing a state-of-the-art launch and entry spacesuit called the Orion Crew Survival System. When they set foot on the moon, they'll be in another all-new next-gen suit, both being developed at the Johnson Space Center and through partnerships with commercial providers. During those spacewalks, astronauts will collect samples for further study of the moon. The Astromaterials Research and Exploration Science Division at JSC is preparing to receive rocks, soil, and ice collected from the moon's south pole, which has a unique crater impact history and ice deposits that have never been sampled. And leading the effort to advance capabilities for science, exploration, and commercial development of the moon is the Commercial Lunar Payload Services Initiative, or CLPS. More than a dozen American companies are developing science investigations and tech demos. Additionally, we need a sustainable presence, a space station in orbit to facilitate continuous lunar access and serve as a home base or a jumping off point for new deep space exploration missions. This is where Gateway comes in. It's a multi-purpose lunar space station being developed by a worldwide effort led out of JSC. NASA is again teaming up with international and commercial partners to create this essential component. Artemis and Gateway will enable NASA's Human Research Program to better understand how the human body adapts beyond low Earth orbit, ensuring future astronauts traveling to the moon and Mars have the tools to keep healthy and thrive in new environments. And with that, we're going to turn it back over to Megan and Kayla at Kennedy.
Thank you so much. So Artemis will also facilitate new discoveries about the moon. So to tell us what we're hoping to learn, we have Sarah Noble here. She's the Artemis Lunar Science Lead. Great to have you here.
Thanks.
So tell us about what we know about the moon.
Yeah, so we learned a ton about the moon during Apollo, right, from the samples and the data that we collected. In fact, we're still learning from those samples and data even today, 50 years later. But then since Apollo, you know, we've actually been studying the moon mostly from above, learning about getting more of a global perspective on the moon that we really didn't have during Apollo. And so that's allowed us to ask a lot better questions and to understand where to go to find the answers to them.
Now that we're headed back to the moon, sending human beings as part of the Artemis program, what are we hoping to learn that's new?
Yeah, so we're going to an entirely different part of the moon for Artemis, right? During Apollo, we kind of landed almost in the same place, like 6 times, right? In the sort of central near side of the moon. But for Artemis, we're going to go explore a new part of the moon. We're going to go to the South Pole, which is some of the oldest rocks on the moon. It's the part of the original crust of the moon. And there's places there that are permanently shadowed, where we think that water and other molecules sort of get trapped, and we really want to understand what those are, and so that we can use them for both science and for as a resource.
Sarah, we're also planning to land a rover at the South Pole of the moon in late 2024. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, absolutely. The Viper rover, the Volatiles Investigating Polar Exploration Rover, is going to go land near the South Pole, and it's actually going to explore some of these permanently shadowed areas. It's going to dip into them, drill down, try to find out what that water is, what else is there, what form that water is, how much is there, so that we can really understand it both from a science perspective, and if we want to use it as a resource, we will understand how to extract it.
So some people might say, you know, we have all these rovers, we have access to machines that can do a lot of the work on the surface of the moon for us, so why is it important to return humans to the moon?
Yeah, it's not an either-or proposition, right? There are some things that robots are better at and some things that humans are better at. And it turns out that humans are much better field geologists. We're really much more efficient and better at that. Plus, we can do better. We can deploy more complicated instruments, and we can use tools in ways that it's very difficult for robots to do, so we can collect better samples. And one of the great things is that we can bring back a lot of samples, right? When we do robotic sample return, it's usually a very small amount. But if you look at what we brought back from Apollo, it's a large amount of samples that literally hundreds, probably maybe thousands of scientists have been able to study over the years and over generations. And that's a lot of brain power to put behind those samples.
So again, that's how Artemis and Apollo are different. Now we're utilizing machines and people.
That's right.
To
Work
hopefully
together.
advance. Yeah.
That's right.
Perfect. Sarah, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me.
So in honor of our destination, the moon, we asked you all to create moon-inspired content and share them with us using the hashtag NASA MoonSnap. We got so many wonderful submissions, so why don't we check them out now? That was a really cool look at all the different kinds of creations, recipes, and also art, and it was great to see what people submitted.
Yeah, it's awesome to see the creativity out there and how people are engaging with this mission in so many different ways.
Yeah. So I know that you didn't submit it yet, but you did create a moon snap, so to say. So why don't we take a look at that picture?
Yeah, this is one of my favorite pictures of the moon that I was able to take from orbit. I think for me, it kind of reminds me of that iconic picture of moonrise or Earthrise from the moon from Apollo. And it's kind of that in reverse. I think there's something about seeing the moon from orbit around the Earth that makes it seem a little bit easier to imagine what it'd be like to have that view from the moon looking back at our home planet.
Yeah, you should definitely submit that because that's an amazing photo. Did you take that yourself?
Yeah, out of the cupola window aboard the space station.
Wow, the resolution's great.
The cameras we have up there are incredible.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
So I haven't taken a moon snap, so I had nothing to submit. So how do you feel about creating a moon snap with me?
Let's do it.
All right, well, take that, if you don't mind lifting it up, and we're just gonna snap a photo here. Oh, lighting. Perfect. So I just created a moon snap. I love it. I'm going to share it. And again, this is just to encourage people to really get involved in this mission. So we will continue to collect and share those photos. So again, if you have a NASA moon snap, just use that hashtag. Okay, Artemis 1 comes amid a very busy year and exciting year at NASA. Some of the highlights include 2 more commercial crew launches with SpaceX, Crew 4 in April, and then Crew 5 last month. In May, NASA and Boeing flew OFT-2, the second uncrewed flight test of the Starliner capsule. The goal is to certify the capsule for regular flights to the International Space Station after a crewed flight test next year. In July, we released the first images captured by our James Webb Telescope, and oh my, those are really beautiful, fascinating photos, and they're going to really help us answer some of astronomy's biggest questions about how our universe began. And then in September, we intentionally slammed the DART spacecraft into asteroid Dimorphos. Boom, look at that. And we successfully changed its course. The asteroid wasn't headed for Earth, but the test was to show we could defend our planet if needed. And recently, 2 other missions that benefit the Artemis program. Last week, we tested a new inflatable heat shield that could help us eventually land humans on Mars. And just 2 days ago, Capstone arrived at its intended orbit around the moon. The small satellite launched from New Zealand in June and will now test a unique lunar orbit for a future space station there.
Artemis 1 heralds a new era in the history of human spaceflight. It marks a pivotal next step in humanity's return to the moon, ushering in a new generation of astronauts, technology, and research. This critical flight test sets the course for a bright future at the moon. It represents our ability to safely send Artemis astronauts and critical hardware to lunar orbit. Humanity will experience Artemis in different ways than we did Apollo. We will explore new areas of the moon with 21st century materials, technologies, systems, and operations. Gateway will be humanity's first space station to orbit the moon, built with next-generation technology. Gateway will not only provide a deep space outpost for future lunar expeditions, it will also serve as a station for landers, experiments, and supplies. Starting with the core power and habitation elements, Gateway will grow with increasing capability as international partners contribute new habitat and refueling modules, observation windows, external robotics, and more. Gateway will enable longer stays and more science to be conducted on and around the moon than ever before. And one day, it will help set the stage for missions to Mars. A highly skilled, diverse core of astronauts will be selected for Artemis missions, including the first woman and first person of color to step foot on the moon. Aboard Gateway, the crew will conduct exciting research from their unique deep space vantage point. Gateway will also be a transfer station for astronauts to board innovative human landing systems that will ferry them to and from the lunar surface for exciting scientific expeditions near the South Pole. Once on the moon, Artemis astronauts will use expertise in fields like biology and geology to conduct groundbreaking research in modern spacesuits using advanced tools. They will drive new rovers to investigate the lunar terrain and unlock some of the greatest mysteries of our solar system. Artemis 1 cements our capability to send astronauts and cargo to the moon for years to come. We're going back to the moon. We are Artemis.
As we approach the opening of our 2-hour launch window, we have a special musical performance for you. America the Beautiful, played in honor of the flight test by the Philadelphia Orchestra and Yo-Yo Ma.
That hydrogen tank on the interim cryogenic propulsion stage now at 75% full. That was fully loaded earlier into the countdown before the leak down at the bottom of the rocket, near the bottom of the rocket in the mobile launcher, that was repaired. So the launch team now just kind of catching up with where they should be at this point in the countdown, which the rocket should be fully loaded normally at this point in the countdown, but they're playing catch up now after falling behind due to that earlier leak. Range
different components. We've got this engine block section down here. You have all of the associated plumbing, everything to feed those propellants down to these engines. You also have these two attachment points here, and that's where we actually tank the SLS rocket. So a lot of focus on those in the previous attempts. They've cooperated spectacularly so far today, and we've been able to fully tank this core stage. And a reminder, you have a fuel, about 500,000 gallons right here of liquid hydrogen, and then an oxidizer. You need those two together, and then an ignition source. That's what gives you your reaction, your thrust, your basically controlled explosion that then comes out of those rocket engines. So fully tanked. These are cryogenic fuels, hundreds of degrees below zero, so we've got a spray-on insulation across the entire vehicle. As it's sitting out there in the Florida air, it's a little bit warm tonight, but we need to keep those hundreds of degrees below zero. It takes a lot of energy to do that, so the less you have to use to keep them cold, the better, which is why we have that insulation. So we're going to be seeing SLS take flight for the first time tonight as we clear all of those final issues. Again, this is going to be one heck of a show when this thing launches into the night sky. So with that, send it back over to you, Megan.
If you're just joining us, welcome to NASA's Kennedy Space Center for live launch coverage of Artemis 1. I'm NASA's Megan Cruz, and this is NASA astronaut Kayla Barron. It's been great having you these past 2 hours.
It's been so awesome to be here for this historic launch tonight.
So right now we are awaiting a new T0. The launch team had to work through some issues, and they're doing a great job at working through those issues. So now we're just waiting to see a new T0, since we had been aiming for the top of the launch window, which opened does open at 1:04 a.m. Eastern Time. Now today is a big deal. Apollo 17 in 1972 was the last time humans stepped foot on the moon. That the rocket you see right there behind us, illuminated in the darkness there, is the first step back towards getting us to the moon. Now Artemis 1 is the first integrated flight test of NASA's deep space exploration systems. That's the ground systems here at Kennedy Space Center, the Space Launch System, or SLS rocket, and the Orion spacecraft. We will send an uncrewed Orion spacecraft farther beyond the moon than any of the Apollo missions before it. For Artemis 2, Orion will have astronauts on board as it orbits the moon. Then future Artemis missions will land the first woman and first person of color on the surface of the moon. So Kayla, why do we want to go back to the moon?
The moon's a super interesting place to study. It can tell us a lot about the Earth, its own formation, but also more about our solar system. And we also want to return, this time in an international partnership, for a permanent presence on the lunar surface that'll teach us everything we need to know to travel onto Mars.
Mm-hmm. And what about for you? I mean, you have the possibility of maybe being selected for those future missions, because the Artemis program can choose from any of you guys, any of the NASA astronauts.
It's a crazy time to be a NASA astronaut and even imagine that that could be real. I think we're all just honored to be a part of the team that's doing this. We're just a small representation of all of the amazing human beings around the world that it takes to do something as audacious as returning to the moon, learning what we need to go onto Mars. So we're just all excited to support the program in any way we can. But of course, a ride to the moon would be incredible. So
yeah.
I think we're all just dreaming about those moonwalks.
Now, since Artemis 1 is setting the stage for those future crewed missions, is there anything in particular about this 26-day mission that you will be watching? Is it re-entry?
Yeah, you know, we've mentioned that a few times throughout the broadcast tonight. The re-entry is a really important part of the flight, of course, and the heat shield, we're interested in seeing how it performs in real life. We tested it on the ground, but Orion's going to be coming in faster and hotter than any human-rated spacecraft in history. And so we really want to see how the heat shield performs and make sure all the systems can keep the crew safe for that dynamic event.
Yeah, we'll all be watching for that too. It's not just about the launch, a 26-day mission, as we said, so we'll be keeping watch over the entire mission. Our workforce now is very different from what it was during the Apollo era. When Apollo 11 launched, there was only one female engineer in the firing room. Today's launch of Artemis 1 is led by NASA's first ever female launch director. Take a look at how she and other women across NASA are shattering glass ceilings.
When I was a little girl, I wanted to be an astronaut,
a scientist,
a doctor, a fighter pilot.
When I was a little girl, I wanted to grow up to be strong and independent.
When we were asked to draw a picture of what we wanted to be when we grew up, I drew an astronaut standing on the surface of the moon.
All I thought about was when I was going to get to NASA.
It's a huge honor to be NASA's first female launch director. To be the launch director for Artemis, NASA has so many wonderful women pioneers, so many heroes to me.
Some of the most amazing women in my eyes are people like Katherine Johnson and the other women that you've seen in Hidden Figures.
Sometimes it's difficult to believe that I'm on this side now wearing this blue flight suit with all of the other astronauts, representing this iconic image that had so inspired and excited me my entire life.
Being of South Asian heritage, Kalpana Chawla was just such a big thing for me growing up.
I've always looked up to Sally Ride and Mae Jemison, who really laid the foundation to allow people like me to be in the position that I am now.
All of these women were pushing those boundaries and breaking those glass ceilings.
Now, of course, there are some fantastic women in leadership positions that inspire me every day.
So much has changed since the Apollo program. During the Apollo 11 launch, we had one woman, one out of 400 engineers in the room. And I look at our team today, it's much more a reflection of the world that we live in.
A big piece of why it's so important to have women and diverse backgrounds, because it allows us to bring everybody along with us on this journey.
It doesn't really matter what you look like. If you've got the brains and you have the knowledge, we need you at the table.
We are at such an exciting time in human spaceflight right now, and Artemis is such a huge part of that.
We haven't been to the moon in many, many years. We have a lot of younger generation folks that have never seen that happen.
We will understand so much more about the moon, about the Earth, about our solar system.
We're going to stay. And to me, that's an amazing idea. The moon is going to be the blueprint for how we go to Mars and out into the solar system and maybe beyond.
It is incredibly exciting to be part of this Artemis team. It still feels pretty surreal to think that I might one day walk on the moon.
To see a woman and a person of color on the surface of the moon, to be able to say that space is for everyone and that we go to space to make life better here on Earth for everyone. I know that tears will be in my eyes.
My message to women and girls out there is to find your passion, whatever that is.
Don't let anyone tell you what you can do or can't do. Only you can realize your dreams.
Space is for everyone. And if me being in this role helps to send that message, I think that's a great thing.
And I just actually love that I don't feel like a woman at NASA. I just feel like a person at NASA.
The women of NASA are Artemis, and we make a difference every day.
I am NASA's Spacewalk Office Hardware Manager.
I'm the Program Scientist for Space Biology.
I'm the Director of NASA's Johnson Space Center.
I am Artemis.
I am Artemis.
私はアルテミスです。Yo soy Artemis.
Us some Artemis.
Anna. Je suis.
Ich bin Artemis.
I am Artemis.
I am Artemis.
I just love the way that that video ends with you and all these other women saying, I am Artemis. What do you think, why is it so powerful to just hear those three words, I am Artemis? Why does that resonate so much?
I think it just represents how far we've come since the Apollo era and how we take advantage of the incredible diversity our country has to offer. Having seats at the table for everyone, you know, spaces for everyone. You heard that a few times in the video, and I think we're proving that out every single day in our work, not just at NASA, but with our international partners. I think it's so important to our ability to succeed on these really complex missions.
Yeah, I thought that was a very powerful video, and I'm glad that people got that message, young girls in particular. Another person who you saw in that video is Pam Melroy. She's a former astronaut and NASA's deputy administrator. So why don't we head over to Jasmine Hopkins, because Pam is there with her now.
Thank you so much, Megan. Yes, I'm honored now to be joined by Pam Melroy, NASA Deputy Administrator. This is just a fantastic night. And we just saw that powerful video with you among so many of the great women here at NASA. What is so important about us now being ready to send, you know, the first woman, the first person of color to the moon?
Yeah, I loved watching that video. Just inspires me. So many of those women are my friends, but also they're just such fantastic engineers and scientists and just so many roles at the agency. I've always thought one of the strongest teams that you could ever find is a family. And families have men and women, and so our teams are stronger, I think, when we have that balance and that diversity. So that was exciting. But for me, I was a part of the Apollo generation, and I was very inspired by, you know, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin and Mike Collins on Apollo 11 and all the Apollo astronauts. I just cannot even imagine the inspiration, though, for a little girl. I mean, it never occurred to me that I wanted to be an astronaut, but of course there were no women astronauts then. I think what's going to happen now with the Artemis generation is that that first woman and the first person of color is just going to have a huge impact on the next generation.
Right. We are just watching with bated breath, and I know that it's going to mean so much to little kids to look up to them. And we understand, too, this is a huge, I mean, when we launch Artemis, it's going to be a global accomplishment. We have the Artemis Accords, which are helping us make sure we explore peacefully. Can you tell us more about those?
Yeah, it's really important, actually, especially because you know, unlike in Apollo, where it was actually just a few countries that had the capability to go to space, now those capabilities are proliferating throughout the world. And so what we do with the rocket is really important, and how we go is just as important. And how we go is as teams and with our partners, and with a sense of the responsibility that we have as we go out into the solar system to do it peacefully for scientific purposes and responsibly.
Right. Pam, you have a great sense of teamwork, and this is definitely not our first time. You know, there's a lot of things that go into testing out a first-time vehicle. There's actually dynamic activity going on right now. So how does this first flight test of SLS compare to other first times, you know, with Shuttle or with Saturn V before that?
Well, I can do even better as a test pilot, right? So there's a history there. In fact, the amazing thing about this is, so first flight of a first aircraft, you actually taxi it out to the end of the runway and then run down the runway and come back and check all the data. And then you might take off once and go around the pattern and come back and land. This is a little bit like taking off and going to fly a full mission on your very first flight of an aircraft. And so everything has to be right. So this compares it's very similar to the experiences that all new rocket developments have, where, you know, it's not just about learning the hardware, that's a big piece of it, but it's also about gelling that team together and your procedures and how you're going to deal with issues that come up, because they will come up. They always come up.
Exactly. And you have that experience as a test pilot, but also as a former astronaut. In that video, we saw you getting your induction into the Astronaut Hall of Fame, which is pretty cool. So what is your perspective, or what advice do you have for the Artemis astronauts, those ones that are going to maybe set foot on the moon?
Oh, well, they don't need my advice. I'd love to elbow them out of the way and go to the moon too. But they are fantastic. I mean, I'm so proud of all of our astronauts. I was just talking to Jessica Watkins, who just came back on Crew 4. This generation is prepared, ready, and excited. And I think they're really excited that we're putting science front and center in the Artemis program too. We're going to learn so much about the solar system from the moon, and even about the Earth. And so I think the astronauts are really excited about doing that hands-on science, and they are ready to go.
Right, I know they're ready to go, and maybe you are as well. But Artemis 1 is just the beginning. Then we have Artemis 2 and on. We're learning so much. What do you think about this just forward movement that we're making right now?
Well, it's really important. This is the Artemis campaign is actually part of a multi-decade effort that we're doing right now, which is really with the goal of creating a blueprint for how we're going to explore with humans and do science throughout the solar system. So we're going to learn through the Artemis campaign on the moon, and then we're going to go demonstrate it on Mars, and then the next destination, who knows where.
Right. I mean, we're going so much further than we ever have before. Pam Melroy, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Go Artemis.
Of course, go Artemis. Megan, back to you.
Thank you both for that interview. Now, teams over at NASA's Johnson Space Center are also monitoring today's launch attempt. So why don't we go back over there with Leah to tell us what's going on over there.
Thanks, Megan. And you're right. Teams here in Mission Control Houston continue to monitor today's events. Again, they will really kick into action once we have liftoff, and they'll remain on console all the way through splashdown. But quickly, I have to show you something, a little show and tell. It makes me feel like the coolest kid. In school, I've got a moon rock here. I hope you can get a good shot of it. It is from Apollo 15, 1971. And when it was brought back to Earth, it was part of a larger rock. In total, it was 21 pounds. This is, of course, a smaller section of that, but we're looking forward to the Artemis program and being able to go back to the moon so that we can continue to gather these kinds of samples, but this time at the lunar South Pole. We've never been there, and we've never brought samples back from that area, so we're really excited to see what might differ in those samples and the ones that we have here. Now, of course, we've got a whole laboratory of scientists that are able to study all of those samples. We just opened some up for the first time earlier this year so that we're able to test with new technology everything that we can learn about these samples that we brought back now 50 years ago. So hopefully within the next few years we're bringing some new ones back to use that same experimental process on and tell us a little bit more about the moon. But just had to show this off. Apollo 15 moon rock. We're looking forward to having some Artemis ones here at Johnson Space Center. With that, I will send it back to you at KSC.
You were a cool kid before you even had the moon rock, so. But now you're even a cooler kid. Now, the name Artemis was chosen because in Greek mythology, she's the twin sister of Apollo. NASA's Leo Martin is over at the nearby Kennedy Space Center Visitor Complex, where thousands have gathered to watch today's launch attempt.
Hi, Megan. I'm actually joined here tonight by a very special group of guests here from Stennis visiting Kennedy Space Center. Why don't you tell me, Ryan, what it is that ties you to tonight's launch?
So we were lucky and privileged enough to be able to test the core stage of the SLS rocket that's going to launch today. We got to green run, which is a full duration hot fire. It's a very historic time for us at Stennis. It was so exciting to be a part of. It was 7 years of hard work by a lot of really great people.
And Jack,
Sorry about just so excited to be here to see it.
And Jack, you were actually telling me that you know firsthand, how much work has gone into tonight's launch. What does it feel like to be here tonight, seeing the rocket fully integrated on the pad, ready to go?
Man, I'm just incredibly grateful to be a part of this history and just really excited to see this thing launch.
And Barry, you were telling me that you know also firsthand, the adversity that these teams have overcome to be here tonight. Do you have a word of encouragement, anything that you'd like to say to the teams all across the United States right now, both at Kennedy and at JSC, who are just sitting in these seats ready to get the rocket launched tonight?
Sure. Persevere. I mean, it's hard work, but it's so well worth it. We spent many hours doing testing and trying to get ready for this moment, and I think we've forwarded that information to those guys, and we also give them the encouragement to continue on, so we know they can do it.
Thanks so much, Barry, and I think it would be great if just on the count of three we can give them a great big go Artemis. 1, 2, 3.
Go Artemis!
Back to you, Megan.
That was amazing. And that's just, people who were actually able to come here to Florida. There's many people who are joining us from around the world who couldn't obviously make the trip out here. So let's take a look at some of those watch parties there. Here's Space Center Houston. It's the visitor center over for Johnson Space Center in Houston. And you can see a lot of people there after hours because that visitor center is closed right now. People are waving. I love it. Wow, look at that. Whatever that is,
That's
it's
awesome.
amazing.
I don't think I've ever noticed that when I'm at Space Center Houston. Maybe it's new.
I know, but yeah, just look at that crowd. It's really fun to see, again, all these people who are captivated, young and old, by today's launch attempt and the beginning of the Artemis program. I know that they're probably looking at the clock and wondering when we might see the launch today. So lovely to see all those people.
And there's the Space and Rocket Center, where we have a ton of people waving their flags, cheering us on tonight for this incredible launch this evening.
I love that. They totally look like cheerleaders, and they're embracing it. I love it. And yeah, this is the U.S. Space and Rocket Center. This is the Visitor Center over in Huntsville, Alabama. As I've said before, Marshall Space Flight Center there is super instrumental in what the Artemis program is doing. They contributed a lot to the mission, so it's nice to see everyone there. And then here is Airbus in Bremen, Germany. So Airbus is the main contractor for the European Space Agency, and together the company and ESA, they provided the European Service Module, which is an important part of the Orion spacecraft. So we have quite a bit of people there. A more reasonable time over there in Germany. It is 7 a.m. So I'm going to say Guten Morgen to them. Did I say it right? Guten Morgen to them over there in Bremen, Germany. Again, the Airbus company. All right, so let's get another check on the launch team with our Daryl Nail, who's inside there and has an update for us.
Yeah, that's right, Megan. So we are clearly in a delay now. The NASA test director, who's basically flying the ship for the launch countdown tonight, has said that we are extending the hold that we were currently in at T-minus 10 minutes and counting. And so that puts us off the 1:04 a.m. Eastern Time launch. We're now slipping indefinitely into the hold. And NASA test director Carlos Monge saying that we are currently estimating how much work needs to be done before resuming the polling that is supposed to take place 15 minutes before launch. It then goes to terminal count at T-minus 10 minutes. Now we've got an update on the tanking of the upper stage liquid hydrogen tank. Currently 95% filled. We're in topping on that tank. It is the last of 4 tanks in the Space Launch System that needed to be completely fueled up before we launch. Of course, cryogenic tanking, a complex operation that has seen some delays tonight. We had a roughly hour delay after a replenish valve on the core stage liquid hydrogen side required hands-on work by a Red Crew team that went out to the launch pad and tightened down some bolts on the valve and got it fixed before leaving the launch pad, and then launch team verifying that that work was complete. Now currently we're awaiting some work with the range. The 45th Space Wing, which oversees the range here and makes sure that the airspace and the ocean out over the flight path is clear, and also has the responsibility to destruct the rocket should it go off track. They have been working on some issues with their equipment and sending a flight termination signal to the rocket. There is testing that must happen with the flight termination system that was delayed by a bad Ethernet switch. Switch has been changed out, and now the range is looking to start testing their connectivity to the rocket in order to preserve that safety function that they are responsible for. So again, we are slipping now indefinitely into the launch window. We're awaiting the launch team to evaluate just how much time is required to complete the work to get this rocket ready to launch. And of course, when we have a new T0 for you, we'll report that out right away. Megan, back to you.
Daryl, thank you so much. As NASA prepares to explore the moon, here's a look at the spacesuits and tools that will help us to do that.
Watching Apollo footage of astronauts doing geology on the surface of the moon is a really great way to think about preparing for Artemis, for putting people on the lunar surface once again. We learn a lot in how they did science operations on the moon and what it's like to work on the moon. You see them doing geology. You see them taking rock samples, putting in a drive tube to take a core sample. You see them bouncing along the surface of the moon on the lunar rover that they used in Apollo 15 through 17. So it's a great way to help drive technology development for the next generation of spacesuits and geology sampling tools.
There's these facilities that help us train like we are on the lunar surface. You know, these 1.6G offload systems or putting people in the aquatic environment are great ways to train the mobility part, right? Like, what can you do and how different does it feel to be in 1.6G and do these tasks?
We've been training astronauts in geology and geoscience for decades now. The Apollo astronauts had literally hundreds of hours of training in geology before they flew to the moon. It's often said that the Apollo astronauts had the equivalent of a master's degree in geology by the time they flew to the moon. In the intervening decades since Apollo, we've been training astronauts who fly to the International Space Station because when they're on the ISS, they spend time observing the Earth, looking out the window, taking pictures of what they see on the Earth's surface. Now that we're looking at putting astronauts on the surface of the moon, we also take them into the field. We take them to field sites here on Earth that resemble field sites that we expect them to see on the moon.
That's the reason why we take them out into places that are unique, like volcanic landscapes or places that are analogous to the lunar surface, to train them on the scale and fidelity of science that you just can't recreate in these facilities.
And so by combining this classroom and field training, we're able to prep them for fundamentals of geology, the major driving lunar science questions that we have that we hope to address with the Artemis program, and teaching them how to do field work in relevant analog environments.
For just science aspects of developing new spacesuits, can it get you to where you need to go? And then once you get there, can you do the cool science that you need to do? And so that's, can you move effectively and efficiently in the suit to be able to collect the samples or use the tools or the instruments? For the visibility, it's like, can you make the necessary observations that you need to? Or does the suit have the lights on it that it needs to illuminate the surface and make the observations you need to? The lunar South Pole holds tremendous resources that are going to allow us to continue to explore. This is a place that we've never been before. There's so much to be learned from getting boots on the ground and exploring a unique place that challenges us as humans and also helps us develop technologies that make our everyday life that much better.
We think there might be volatiles present at the South Pole. By using these volatiles, we'll be able to do things like create drinking water, create rocket fuel to launch astronauts back to Earth. And so by harnessing the power of the land, we'll be able to help astronauts establish that long-term sustainable presence.
It's human nature to explore. Pushing our boundaries and exploring our universe is, I think, just one of those things that's just stuck in our human nature, and that we need to do it in order to understand the world around us, including our Earth and our solar system.
We just heard there how curiosity is just a part of us. So, with that in mind, why don't we do some social questions? Because some people are very curious to hear what you have to say about their questions. So why don't we pull up the first question here? What are your thoughts on the responsibilities that come with going to space? Obviously a question for you. I am not going to space.
Yeah, the opportunity to travel to space comes with a lot of responsibility. I think for all of us, it's a huge honor to be a part of these teams, and the work we're doing is so critical in supporting scientific discovery on the ground. So on the International Space Station, we're a national laboratory. Our crew executed over 350 different scientific experiments during our 6-month mission. And so when you think about that, it's years of work to get one of these payloads or an experiment on the space station. Yes. And sometimes that's someone's life's work you're holding in your hands and executing. And so being prepared for those moments is really important, and understanding how to bring the team from the ground into solving complex problems. We take that really, really seriously. And of course, we want to share what that experience is like. Only a few people have been able to go to space. And as we commercialize space, as low Earth orbit becomes more accessible, that'll change. But still, it's only available to some of us. So we really want to share what that's like and the perspective we gain from our time up there.
It's really great to see and hear that you guys acknowledge that, right? Like that this experiment that you're holding, that you're working on for 6 months, somebody has been working on literally for years. I mean, I've talked to some scientists and they're saying, oh, this has been my life's work, 20 years of my life's work. So yeah, that was a really good question. I like that question a lot. Okay, we have another one from social media here. Astro Kayla, have you considered what you might say if you had the opportunity to be the first female to set foot on the moon's surface?
No, I have not considered that. If I was in that role, it's something I would take really seriously. I think the iconic words of Neil Armstrong, one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind, are something that we all know, whether you witnessed that moment or not, or it happened before you were born. For me, I think we all have that embedded in our psyche, those important words. So I think it's something I would have to think a lot about ahead of that mission.
Yeah, that would be in the history books. That'll be something you're remembered for. Oh my gosh, I'd be so anxious delivering it, even after I've thought of what I want to say, like to actually open my mouth and say it from the surface of the moon. Wow. Yeah. That we'll have to think about that one for sure. Okay, let's see another question here. Oh, why is the spacesuit orange in color?
That's an awesome question that I wish I knew the answer to. Megan and I were actually talking about that earlier when we had Snoopy up here. It's a continuation of the same suit that we used during the shuttle era, and I was kind of hypothesizing that maybe it's to help forces if for some reason when we landed in the water we had to get out of the capsule for some reason, it would be easy to see us. But that I'm gonna have to take a phone a friend on that one, I think, to know the real answer. I'm sure somebody will be commenting on social media right now with what the real history behind the orange suit is.
I'm trying to think about it too. I'm thinking, does it have anything to do with SLS being orange because of the foam
match your
insulation?
vehicle.
Yeah,
why not?
Maybe it's that.
I don't know.
I don't know. We got stumped. That was our first one that we got stumped on. Do we have another question? All right. If you could name one of the moon's craters, what would you name it?
Oh man. What would you name it, Megan? I don't know. That's a big decision.
I thought you might say the name of your zero-G graph.
Oh, FOW? Yeah, maybe. I don't know. That's a pretty big responsibility, I think, to name these geological features. And a lot of the craters on the moon already have names. So I'm sure there's some that maybe they haven't named, they're too small, or we haven't explored them yet. But a lot of them already do have names. Like, we're going to be exploring the edge of Shackleton Crater as part of Artemis mission. So a lot of them are already named and mapped.
Yeah. Thanks for throwing it back on me. I was like, I don't know. Do you think our parents or husband or fiance are now upset that we didn't say them?
I don't know. I mean, I don't think so. I think they understand. These are big decisions.
This is. All right, last question here, for this segment at least. What will Orion do when it gets to the moon?
So for this mission, Artemis 1, it's actually going to orbit the moon and then go into a distant retrograde orbit. And so it'll get really close as 62 miles, and then go way past the moon. And way deeper into space than we've ever been before. So yeah, the Orion vehicle will be checking out all of its systems. We're going to be analyzing that data from the ground, and then we're going to see that it can survive re-entry and a successful splashdown off the coast of San Diego.
Yeah, that was a good question too. Okay, well again, just keep those questions coming. We are entering into this launch window, and we do have time, so we'd love to hear from you, and we'd love to try at least to answer most of your questions. So you've been hearing throughout the broadcast all the different science that returning to the moon will enable us to do. So there's actually something called the Prime 1 mining experiment, and that's going to robotically look for ice and other resources below the lunar surface.
NASA's first Polar Resources ice mining experiment, also known as Prime 1, will robotically look for ice and other resources below the lunar surface. Thanks to data from spacecraft orbiting the moon, scientists believe that the polar regions contain water ice in the form of ice just below the surface. With the right technologies, that ice is a game-changing resource that can be mined and used to produce propellant and breathable oxygen for future explorers. Under NASA's Commercial Lunar Payload Services Initiative, the agency selected intuitive machines to fly and land Prime 1 on the moon's south pole. Prime 1 will land near the Shackleton Crater to drill into the lunar soil in an area that could contain water ice. Prime 1 is made up of two instruments: Trident, the regolith and ice drill for exploring new terrain, and M-SOLO, the mass spectrometer observing lunar operations. Trident will drill up to 3 feet into the lunar surface, extract lunar soil, and bring it up to the surface. Trident drills to its maximum depth in multiple phases, stopping at different increments. As it reaches each desired depth, it will pause and retract the drill string to deposit lunar soil on the surface for analysis. This is where M-Solo comes in. M-Solo is a commercial off-the-shelf mass spectrometer modified for spaceflight. It will evaluate the chemical elements and compounds released from the lunar soil for water and other chemical compounds. Trident will then proceed to the next specified depth and repeat the process until samples at all desired depths have been analyzed for water. If no ice is found where Prime 1 lands, NASA will still collect valuable information about drilling into the lunar soil for a future mission. NASA's Viper, the Volatiles Investigating Polar Exploration rover, will use Prime 1 technology on a mobile robot that will navigate the Moon's south pole searching for additional resources. Prime 1 data will help NASA assess lunar resources to inform future Artemis missions and a robust human presence on the Moon.
So we are still awaiting a new T0 for today's launch attempt, but for more on what to expect when we launch for this first day, let's go to NASA's Dan Hewitt. He's inside our Apollo Saturn V Center at the KSC Visitor Complex.
Hey, thanks, Megan. Everybody, welcome back to the moon board. There's a lot of people here in the complex. I just heard a woo-hoo. People are getting in and out because we have a great view of launch when it's going to happen, and it's going to happen today. But that launch is just the first step in the Artemis 1 mission. So let's look at what's ahead for this historic first flight. As we just said, launch is step number 1. Those 4 RS-25 engines throttle up, followed shortly after by the 2 solid rocket boosters igniting, sending SLS and Orion skyward. Now on our way uphill, we'll have a number of jettison events. You'll be able to see things coming off of the SLS rocket. One of the most visual ones will be these 2 solid rocket boosters. Now they'll expend their propellant a little over 2 minutes into the flight. They will separate. We'll see them flare off onto either side, and then the core stage continues to fire. We're also going to see the launch abort system come off the top. Once you get high enough in the atmosphere, it's no longer required. You could actually do aborts using engines on Orion and its service module. I will also note that on the launch abort system, it's got those 3 solid rocket motors. The jettison motor is active. The abort and the attitude ones are not for this flight. We don't have people, so we're not flying a fully active abort system. We also have 3 fairings that are there to protect Orion, the service module and the crew module, as we're flying up through the really dense parts of the Earth's atmosphere. Next up, we'll hit core stage separation. So we've got 4 main engines. We'll hear MECO, main engine cutoff. Those engines will shut down, the core stage will separate, drop away. It's eventually going to splash down in the ocean. And that hands over the propulsion duties to this, our upper stage, the Interim Cryogenic Propulsion Stage, or ICPS. Its first job is to execute what's known as a perigee raise maneuver. So the perigee is the lowest part of your orbit. You have a perigee, that's your low part, and an apogee, that's your highest point. We're going to raise up the perigee, and that's going to actually put us in a nice circular path around the planet. And while we're there, that gives us time to check out Orion. We're flying it in space for the second time, the first time in this fully integrated stack with SLS. We'll be able to look at all of Orion's systems, make sure those solar arrays are capturing the sun's energy and turning it into electrical power for Orion's systems, make sure the communications are working, all of our guidance, navigation, and control. That is your time to make sure you have a healthy spacecraft before you do something that is going to send it to the moon. And that's next up on our list. That's the trans-lunar injection. For today's launch profile, that's going to be a firing of about 18 minutes of that single engine on the upper stage. Now that engine optimized for a vacuum, it's producing about 24,000 pounds of thrust. So it's a pretty big engine, and it's doing that because we need enough energy to be able to send our payload, Orion, beyond low Earth orbit and send it on a path to head out to the moon. Now after that burn is complete, ICPS separates. It's going to do what's called a disposal burn. So it's going to send itself on a path from Earth around the moon and slingshot out into what's known as a heliocentric orbit. So it's going to completely leave the Earth-Moon system and go into orbit around our sun. But after it separates, propulsion duties get handed over to the European Service Module, and it's got a couple of different engines that it's going to be using, and we're going to be testing those out just on day one. We're going to do what's called the Outbound Trajectory Correction Burn 1, and we'll do a couple of these trajectory corrections as we're flying out to the moon, but that first one is that first critical test of this large engine, the Orbital Maneuvering System engine. That's the one that has the most thrust, generating about 6,000 pounds of force in a vacuum, and that's what's going to be doing a lot of our maneuvers, or giving us that pushing power as we do these maneuvers around the moon to enter into what's known as distant retrograde orbit, or DRO, and that's this dotted line that you see around here. Now, we call it distant basically because of the distance we're away from the moon. We're about 40,000 miles, a little bit less, off the lunar surface, and then we call it retrograde because the moon orbiting planet Earth in this direction, going in a counterclockwise fashion, we're going to be entering into a clockwise orbit around the moon, opposite retrograde. Now, to do that, we're going to get in close, we're going to dip in off the lunar surface, we're going to be about 80 miles, 80 statute miles off the lunar surface as we do this outbound powered flyby. Again, the major thrust coming from that Orbital Maneuvering System engine. After we do that, we'll do a final maneuver to actually go into that distant retrograde orbit, that DRO. Now, why DRO? Why are we not just going around the moon and coming back on like a free return trajectory, which we did on some of the Apollo missions? Well, in DRO, it's a very stable orbit. It doesn't require a lot of fuel to maintain that area around the moon. So it gives you a lot of time to really test the spacecraft. If you followed with any launch of a new spacecraft, you know there's only so much testing you can do on the ground. Once you actually put all of that hardware in space, in the environment that it's going to be operating, hundreds of thousands of miles away from Earth, you're going to learn things you didn't even realize about everything from communications, the life support systems, the thermal control. Everything on a spacecraft needs to get put through its paces in this environment before we put people on board, and that's why we're heading out to DRO. Eventually, though, it's going to be time to come home, and we will do a DRO departure maneuver. This, again, firing up that Orbital Maneuvering System engine and others on the service module, and this is what's going to commit us from leaving the moon and heading on back towards Earth. We'll dip in once more, close off the lunar surface, slingshot and use the lunar gravity to do this return-powered flyby, and then similar to the way out, we can make correction burns as we kind of fine-tune our path back towards the Earth. And then it's time for re-entry. A couple of things happen before that. One of the really critical ones, spacecraft separation. We're going to detach the European Service Module shortly before re-entry. Its job largely done. That burns up in the Earth's atmosphere and reveals on the crew module the heat shield. I circled it earlier. This is goal number one of the Artemis mission. Artemis 1 mission is testing this heat shield at lunar return velocities, because when we make that trip around the moon and we come back, we are going in speeds of excess of 20,000 miles an hour. So when we slam into the Earth's atmosphere, it's going to heat that thing up to more than 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit. For the Artemis 1 profile, we're going to do what's known as a skip re-entry. So basically, you can come in too shallow and skip off the atmosphere, too narrow, and you're going to do what's known as a ballistic entry, which really heats things up. We're going to do kind of a mix where we're going to skip once off the atmosphere, and that we're still going to get the heat, but that helps to reduce some of the G loads on the crew. Once you're through that, you get to parachute deploy. There's 11 parachutes in total that are going to slow Orion down before it splashes down. We're going to be going from 20,000 miles an hour to about 300 miles an hour before those parachutes deploy, and then they do a final job of getting it in the water in the South Pacific. We've got these big orange balloons. That's an uprighting system, so even if Orion landed in the water upside down, those can inflate, and they put us back upright into what's known as stable 1. That's where you want your spacecraft to be, nice and upright in the water, especially if you're an astronaut in there floating. Now, we also have a large U.S. Navy ship with a big bay that's going to basically come up and swallow Orion into its deck, and you've got a couple of other assets in the area to help recover hardware, the forward bay cover, parachutes, things like that. But that's scheduled to happen 26 days after a launch today. So that's 26 days from liftoff here in Florida around the moon to a splashdown in the Pacific, and that will be the first mission in the Artemis program, the farthest we've ever sent a human-rated spacecraft in history, and just the first step before we put people on board. So that's a look at everything still to come. We're counting down to that launch. I'll send it back over to Megan and the team at the host desk, guys.
A very comprehensive look at that. Thank you so much, Dan. If you're just joining us, welcome to Kennedy Space Center and our live coverage of Artemis 1, an uncrewed flight test that will return us to the moon in nearly 50 years. But you know, some might ask, why the moon? Well, here's why.
We are going. The history of this agency is marked with broken barriers, once viewed as impossible, with science fiction turned reality, with innovations that have spun industries all their own, and with demonstrations of peace for all humankind.
We soar in the skies of our home planet. We maintain a human presence just outside of gravity, and we touch points all across the solar system and beyond. We're going back to the moon, and this is why.
The moon is a treasure trove of science.
It holds opportunities for us to make discoveries about our home planet, about our sun,
and about our solar system.
The wealth of knowledge to be gleaned from the moon will inspire a new generation of thought and action.
Without fail, every major program and mission NASA has invested in has led to technologies and capabilities that have shaped our culture.
The breakthroughs of the Artemis era will define our generation and the generations to follow.
The tens of thousands of jobs associated with propelling us to the moon today are just the beginning of a lunar economy that will see hundreds of thousands of new jobs develop around the world.
This is not an ambition of one entity or one country. The exploration of the moon is a shared effort,
woven together by a desire for the greater good.
Why the moon? Because the missions of tomorrow will be sparked by the accomplishments of the Artemis generation today.
Because the ambition to go has already begun.
And because Mars is calling. We need to learn what it takes to establish a community on another cosmic shore. So let's camp close before pushing out.
And so, we go to the moon now, not as a series of isolated missions, but to build a community on and around the moon capable of proving how to live on other worlds.
We'll use the lessons from more than 50 years of peaceful exploration to send a new generation to the lunar surface to stay.
We will anchor our efforts on the lunar South Pole to establish the Artemis Base Camp,
positioning us for long-term science and exploration of the lunar surface.
We will prove what it takes to assemble a complex ship in deep space.
We will perfect descending down to and returning from a distant surface.
We will learn how humans can survive and thrive in a partial gravity environment.
With improved spacesuit designs, mobile habitats, and with reconnaissance robots pre-positioning and relocating supplies.
We will learn how to utilize the resources we find on these other worlds, starting with finding water ice and purifying it into drinkable water.
And refining that into hydrogen for fuel and oxygen to breathe.
We will establish fission power plants on the surface of the moon, capable of supporting a growing community of efforts.
And we will expand the logistics supply chain to enable commercial and international partners
to resupply and refuel deep space outposts.
None of this is simple or easy, but nothing in our history ever has been.
The Eagle has landed. You got a bunch of guys about to turn blue. We're breathing again. Thanks a lot.
This kind of continuous lunar presence is a natural extension of all that we've learned in low Earth orbit. And what we will accomplish there will ensure the monumental missions to Mars are within reach. As we ready the launch of the first Artemis mission, And as commercial companies ready their lunar landers for the first private payload deliveries, we have already begun to take the next step.
Throughout this launch broadcast, our NASA's Leah Martin has been introducing us to people over at the Kennedy Space Center Visitor Complex who have come out for hopefully the maiden voyage of Artemis 1. People from near and far, young and old, just really excited to hopefully see this historic flight. So now she's joined by somebody else who has a really interesting story. Leah, tell us about it.
Megan, I think one of the most exciting things about being here tonight is being with people who are like-minded, who have such a strong tie to the history of our nation's space program and their love of spaceflight. And I actually struck up an amazing conversation with Scott here, and you were telling me about the special tie that you have to tonight's launch as well.
Oh yeah, I literally grew up with NASA. My father went to work with the NACA before NASA. Went to work for Dr. von Braun, followed him over to Marshall Space Flight Center, and became, when it became NASA. He worked on the Jupiter C, Redstone, Saturn I, Saturn V, and then because of that, he brought me here to see Apollo 11 launch. So that was my first launch. I was 5 years old. I loved it. Still remember the sound. That's about all. And then years later, through my flying career, I was able to bring my sons back with my friends that flew the shuttle, and they saw 5 launches and 4 landings. But basically, I wanted to be here. I was here for the first moon launch, the last moon launch back when Uncle Gene Cernan, our family friend, went to on Apollo 17. So I wanted to be here for this because it's kind of in our family, in our blood. And hopefully I'll be around for the next one when we go and land again. So that's
incredible. So you have NASA actually in your DNA, grew up with the program.
Yeah. I knew most of the German scientists. The kids sat in our lap, Dr. Ernst Stirlinger, and my father flew with von Braun because he was a general aviation pilot as well. So they'd get off work and fly. And they were in Life magazine together, National Geographic, so it was fun. I literally knew Al Shepard, all the Mercury, Gemini, Apollo guys, and it was an honor. I would have loved to have been an astronaut, but I went a different route, but I can still come here and see them.
We can, and we're so grateful, so thrilled to see you here tonight, and so excited that you will be able to actually compare the last launch and the sound of the last one with the one tonight. It's absolutely going to rock the sky.
I want it to be even louder. I want to feel it. Yeah.
Thanks so much for joining us tonight. It's been an honor to meet you. And Megan, we're going back to you.
Leah, thank you so much for sharing that. That was such a fun story. Here we are now at Space Center Houston. This is a live look inside of the visitor center there. Lots of people hoping to see the launch today. I love this guy in the front with his NASA shirt representing. And again, just seeing children and young and old, just all these people who feel captivated and are excited about our next giant leap into deep space. So glad to have them here. Oh my gosh, I love this.
Yeah, the team in Marshall and Huntsville there is always ready for their shot. Waving their flags, they're super pumped. That's the home to the SLS program office, so they have a dog in the fight tonight, seeing Artemis launch for the first time.
Is that an inflatable astronaut in the center? Do you see that? I think somebody is dressed up as an astronaut.
Look at that.
Yeah,
they're
representing.
Ready to go.
I love this. Yeah, I'm so glad that they're there. Again, these visitor centers are closed to the public, but the people there decided to hold a watch party, and
look,
that's
our
exciting
friends in
to see.
Germany are ready for us this time. They anticipated the delay. They look pumped and ready to go.
So these are employees of Airbus. Airbus is the main contractor for the European Space Agency, and together they provided the European service module for the Orion spacecraft. So really, we should be applauding them. They shouldn't be applauding. Thank you so much, guys, for your contribution to the program, and can't wait to see Orion and SLS launch. Okay, so now let's head back over to Daryl Nail over with the launch team so we can hear any updates about a new T0.
Yeah, Megan, thank you. And a clearer picture is starting to emerge as the launch team now reports out that they only have a few minutes left of work to do before they're ready to pick up polling. And we're also hearing that some of that polling, which kicks off with the mission management team, is also now just about 3.5 minutes away. Now, we are currently still in that hold. But the launch team, NASA's test director, is continuing to move the team forward. We've wrapped up work on the upper stage and the lower stage. You're looking now live inside firing room 1, where launch director Charlie Blackwell Thompson is overseeing her launch team. We've had a number of delays that have put us off the T0, but we are starting to track to a T0 close to around a quarter till, top of the hour. But we do need to have some polling that takes place. I'm pausing now because I'm listening in to the teams as they communicate. In this launch window, which we're currently 26 minutes into, and it's 2 hours long, it runs until 3:04 a.m. Eastern Time. We have what's called 40 cutouts. And in those cutouts, they range from about a second to about a minute. These are times where they can't launch. These cutouts must be accounted for when determining a new T0. The upper stage of the rocket, which was the last to get ready and configured, just recently the team cycled the liquid hydrogen valves, which is required, and they are currently working on the LO2 valves, liquid oxygen valves in the upper stage. That work is almost done. We are now a minute and a half away from the poll of the mission management team, which is several minutes before T-minus 15 minutes. When that poll starts, we'll get a clearer picture of our T0. NASA's test director has informed the launch team to all switch to a common communication channel. It's called 232. And what this means is that the entire launch team is now on one channel, and all future communication will happen there. Whereas there are many channels. Now they reduce it down to one. Just heard from NASA test director Carlos Monge. I'm sorry, Jeff Spaulding. Jeff Spaulding's on. They swapped out. There are currently no constraints to launch. Great news. Again, no constraints to launch. And they're getting ready to pick up with a poll to determine readiness for launch. Okay, NASA Test Director Jeff Spaulding getting ready to conduct the readiness poll, so we are getting close. We're going to pull up the audio now so that you can listen in.
LPs go. And rock. Rockets go. All right, copy all. And Launch Director NTD, our launch team is ready to proceed at this time.
I copy all NTD. At this time, I will proceed with my poll. And attention on 232, this is the Launch Director performing the final poll for launch. Verify no constraints and go for launch. EGS Program Chief Engineer.
EGS Program Chief Engineer verifies that the EGS, SLS, and Orion Program Chief Engineers have no constraints and are go for launch.
Copy, Greg. Thank you. EGS Chief Safety Officer.
The EGS CSO verifies the SLS, Orion, and EGS CSOs have no constraints and are go for launch.
Copy, John. Thank you. Range weather.
Weather has no constraints and weather is go for launch.
Copy, LWO. And Mission Manager. And Mission Manager, Launch Director.
Launch Director, Mission Manager on 232. The mission management team has been polled. You have a go to proceed with terminal count and launch of Artemis 1.
I copy all. Thank you. And NTD, Launch Director.
Go ahead, Launch Director.
Yes, sir. On behalf of all the men and women across our great nation who have worked to bring this hardware together to make this day possible, and for the Artemis generation, this is for you. At this time, I give you a go to resume count and launch Artemis 1.
Copy, Launch Director, and thank you. All right, we do have a couple of steps to configure, and then we will be ready to resume the clock. CVSE, NTD. CVSE here. Initiate recording of Orion cameras at this time. In work. R, NTD. RSR here. Perform the booster ignition SNA arm rotation enable.
NDT, RSR, booster ignition SNA arm and rotation enable is complete.
And I copy. Thank you.
Okay, so there you heard the poll from Launch Director.
Early.
Getting ready to get that new T0 time. The poll that you heard was the NASA Test Director's poll. And
all right, and we have verified no cutouts at this time. And all personnel, we are going to resume the clock. GLS, you can resume the clock on your mark.
GLS copies. Countdown clock will resume on my mark. 3, 2, 1, mark. GLS mainline has been initiated.
Okay.
T-minus 10 minutes and counting.
We are T-minus 10 minutes away from liftoff of Artemis 1. As you can see, the clock is now moving. Let's put that up. T-minus 9 minutes and 47 seconds. The L-minus 15 poll complete.
Show 06:47:44 is the new liftoff time.
Affirm.
Okay.
Oh, 1:47:44. 1:47 a.m. Eastern Time and 44 seconds. We went straight into terminal count. Liftoff now 9 minutes away. So terminal count. Control has been given over to the GLS, the ground launch sequencer, a computer and software that is doing all of the commanding and monitoring of the Space Launch System. We'll hear call-outs from the GLS operator, Alex Pandalos. as well as NASA Test Director Jeff Spaulding. GLS is pre-tensioning the umbilicals at this very moment. You can see them as they run down the rocket. That's getting them ready to detach. At liftoff, those arms will swing away, will let go of the rocket in a clockwise direction. T-minus 8 minutes and counting. The GLS is performing up to 100 commands per second, including configuring ground systems for power transfer to the rocket. GLS is turning on cameras, recording video inside and outside the crew module to collect data for engineers. Purging the aft skirt booster with high flow nitrogen. Clear out any hydrogen gas that may be there. You can see the crew access arm is already retracted. When there is crew during Artemis 2, it would happen at T-minus 6 minutes. But out of abundance of caution, they went ahead and retracted the arm well ahead of liftoff. Want to point your attention to the base of the mobile launcher. If something wasn't done to reduce the power from the pressure caused by the rocket's ignition and thunderous sound, it could damage the rocket. So the ignition overpressure and sound suppression system will flood the mobile launcher with water. You'll see that sequence start at T-minus 17 seconds. Now coming up in less than 30 seconds, the ground launch sequencer will start bringing the high energy systems online, starting with core stage pressurization. Firing room 1 is completely silent as they listen for the next call.
GLS is go for core stage tank pressurization.
The core stage tank is now pressurizing to flight levels. The replenish valve to the liquid hydrogen tank now closing. The liquid oxygen tank will come a little later. Now we're arming the Orion ascent pyros and transfer to internal power. The launch abort system, or LAS jettison motor, is now armed. On this flight, the abort motor is inactive because there is no crew on board. Up next is the flight termination system, or FTS, which gives the Space Force the ability to destruct the rocket if it goes in the wrong direction. Let's listen in for that.
GLS is go for FTS arm.
The flight termination system is now armed. Coming up at 4 minutes and 40 seconds, a big moment. This is where the RS-25 engines and their bleed go to high flow. It's been a little tricky to dial in.
GLS is go for LH2 high flow bleed check.
Good word, we've passed that. The cryo team got the LH2 engine bleed pressure loop dialed in. They are now at the right temperature for launch. Countdown continues. T-minus 4 minutes, 15 seconds. Up next, GLS fires up the KPUs. Those are high-speed turbines which provide pressure to hydraulic pumps that steer the RS-25s. Stands for Core Stage Auxiliary Power Unit Start.
GLS is go for core stage APU start.
That now leads to the thrust vector control test at T-minus 2 minutes and 30 seconds. That can proceed now, and we will see the engines gimbal at the bottom of the core stage. At T-minus 3 minutes and 10 seconds, you will hear the go for purge sequence 4. That's a helium purge of the 4 core stage engines downstream of the propellant valve, getting the air and moisture out.
GLS is go for purge sequence 4.
And in just a few seconds, GLS will close the core stage LOX vent, liquid oxygen. The white vapor cloud caused from the super cold gaseous oxygen condensing the water in the atmosphere will disappear. You see it coming out there now. And there it goes, it's closed. LOX vent closed, pressure rising in the core stage LOX tank to flight levels. Coming up in 15 seconds, look for that thrust vector control actuator test. Engines will gimbal. And there they go. The 4 core stage RS-25 engines gimbaling around, testing the ability to steer the rocket into space. They will operate at 109% performance. Each RS-25 throwing down 500,000 pounds of thrust. All 4, 2 million pounds. All together with the boosters, 8.8 million pounds of thrust.
GLS is go for upper stage to internal power.
Now the upper stage has gone to internal power. So power is removed from the rocket's upper stage, the ICPS, and it's been switched to battery power. The same milestone is coming up for the core stage at T-minus 1 minute and 30 seconds.
GLS is go for core stage to internal power.
The rocket's core stage, which houses the 3 flight computers, is now on battery power. So there is no more hold time available because there's no more margin on the batteries. So if we have a hold, we'd have to recycle back to T-minus 10 minutes and recharge those batteries. The count continues. A note now, shortly after liftoff.
1 minute.
Shortly after liftoff, Mission Control Houston will take control of the rocket, and my colleague, Leah Cheshire, will take over commentary. T-minus 50 seconds and counting. Coming up at T-minus 33 seconds, the GLS will hand off control to the ALS. This is the autonomous launch sequencer. On board the rocket, it will take over command and control of the rocket. But the ALS will check, make sure there's no holds coming from the ground up until T-minus 2 seconds.
GLS is go for ALS.
And we are go for ALS. The Space Launch System is now counting down to liftoff of Orion on its maiden voyage to the moon. Launch team can no longer recycle the count. Sound suppressor water now flowing under the ML. And here we go.
10.
Hydrogen burn-off igniters initiated. 7, 6, 5. Core stage engine start. 3, 2, 1. Boosters in ignition. And liftoff of Artemis 1. We rise together back to the moon and beyond.
All 4 RS-25 engines on the core stage and 2 solid rocket boosters now propelling the vehicle at 128 miles per hour. Hearing good control on the roll from teams in Mission Control Houston. All good calls so far. Now 30 seconds into the flight of Artemis 1. First milestone will be for the vehicle to pass through max Q at about 1 minute and 9 seconds into launch. This is the greatest period of atmospheric force on the rocket. SLS now traveling 607 miles per hour. You're looking at 8.8 million pounds of maximum thrust. Quiet here in the loops in Mission Control. The 4 core stage engines are throttling down ahead of passing through max Q. Now 1 minute, 21 seconds into the flight, traveling at 1,420 miles per hour. The 4 core stage engines are back at maximum thrust. The next major milestone will be for the solid rocket boosters to cut off and jettison at about 2 minutes and 11 seconds into the flight, so about 30 seconds from now. Again, quiet here in Mission Control Houston as teams continue monitoring the flight of Artemis 1. We're now 16 miles downrange from the launch pad at Kennedy Space Center, traveling over 2,800 miles per hour. Standing by for solid rocket booster jettison and shortly thereafter.
Yo, man.
Confirmation that the solid rocket boosters have separated these 177-foot boosters. Now the core stage continues to power the flight of Orion, all 4 RS-25 engines firing, traveling over 3,400 miles per hour, 46 miles downrange. 2 minutes and 36 seconds into the flight. Hearing nominal calls here in Mission Control Houston. We've still got 4 good engines on the core stage. Next up, we'll be looking for the service module fairing to separate. This is 3 15 by 15-foot fairing panels, providing structural support, protecting the service module. Those will separate at about 3 minutes and 11 seconds into flight, and very shortly thereafter will be followed by the launch abort system separation. Just over 3 minutes into the flight of Artemis 1, now traveling over 4,060 miles per hour, 83 miles downrange. We just had confirmation that the service module fairing has separated. And that the launch abort system pyros have fired, separating those from Orion as well. For future crew members, we just heard the call for 3 engine press, meaning if SLS were to lose an engine at this point in the mission, we could still achieve a nominal mission. We would just have an extended main engine cutoff time. However, we still have 4 good engines, all at maximum thrust right now, powering the first flight of Artemis at 5,200 miles per hour, 148 miles downrange.
भाई लॉन्च हो गया भाई लॉन्च हो गया ठीक है भाई इतना ही लाइव था इससे ज़्यादा तो हम बोलेंगे
We're 4 minutes and 16 seconds into the flight of Artemis 1. So far, we've had a clean ascent. We saw those solid rocket boosters jettison about 2 minutes and 11 seconds after liftoff. Shortly after, we had the service module panels fairings separate, as well as the launch abort system. The launch abort system was inert for this flight, except to perform this separation. Those 4 core stage engines will continue to fire and power the flight of Artemis 1, now traveling over 6,800 miles per hour, 229 miles downrange. Booster flight controller reports that the engines are looking good. Our core stage main engine cutoff time is about 8 minutes and 3 seconds. We are now 5 minutes and 11 seconds into the flight, 7,656 miles per hour. Again, 4 good core stage engines, those 4 RS-25 engines. The last time those core stage engines flew, they were taking space shuttles to orbit, and now with upgraded capabilities, they're launching the future of human spaceflight. 5 minutes, 42 seconds into the mission. We are now traveling 8,800 miles per hour, 345 miles downrange from the launch pad at Kennedy Space Center. Again, we are anticipating core stage main engine cutoff at about 8 minutes and 3 seconds. And about 10 seconds later, we'll see core stage separation, at which point Orion and the interim cryogenic propulsion stage will be flying free. Now traveling over 10,000 miles per hour, 6 minutes and 15 seconds into the flight of Artemis 1, 427 miles downrange. Quiet here on the loops in Mission Control Houston. Teams continue to monitor this first flight. About a minute and a half now until that core stage main engine cutoff time. Our 4 core stage engines continue to fire at maximum thrust. Coming up on 7 minutes since launch today, now traveling over 12,800 miles per hour, 563 miles downrange. Again, still quiet here in Mission Control, Houston. As we prepare for main engine cutoff, the 4 RS-25 engines are beginning to throttle down. "30 seconds now until core stage main engine cutoff. All 4 engines continue to throttle down. Now 7 minutes 45 seconds into the flight, traveling over 16,000 miles per hour. Continuing to hear good calls here in Mission Control, Houston. We're standing by for core stage main engine cutoff. And we have confirmation of core stage main engine cutoff. Orion is now in Earth's orbit. The flight dynamics officer reports that we have a nominal main engine cutoff. And we just heard the call for core stage separation. That means Orion and the interim cryogenic propulsion stage are now flying free from the core stage of the Space Launch System. The next milestone will be solar array deploy approximately 18 minutes after liftoff. But before Orion stretches its wings, let's check back in with our friends at Kennedy Space Center and hear all about what it was like to hear the rocket roar off the launch pad. Megan and Kayla, I've got to hear all about it.
Well, if you're just joining us, welcome to NASA's Kennedy Space Center, where we just watched Artemis 1 launch, our first step towards our next adventure into deep space. As Leah said, I'm NASA's Megan Cruz, and this is NASA astronaut Kayla Barron. And I'm kind of still giddy and speechless. I don't even know how to explain how I'm feeling right now.
I feel the same way. This is the first launch that I've been able to watch in person. And I've got to say, it was incredible. It took my breath away and I was tearing up. Just what an amazing accomplishment for this team, this international team, people who have been dedicating their careers to getting this rocket off the ground and taking the first step to getting a crew on that vehicle back to the moon. It was just incredible.
Yeah, this is a moment I think that we're all going to remember where we were when we saw this sort of thing, you know what I mean? And it was great to see, again, when we entered into terminal count, everybody here just started cheering, you know, coming out to get a really good view. And boy, I mean, it lit up the night sky and it just shook everything around us. Did you feel that? Like in my bones, I felt that.
Oh yeah, the cool thing is just kind of the delay between what you see and what you hear, because of course the sound travels a little bit slower, and it was just amazing. The ground shook. We could hear the thrust pushing that rocket into space. 8.8 million pounds of thrust.
Yes.
It's incredible. It was amazing to see here live in person.
How does it compare? So this is your first launch on the ground. How does it compare to your launch when you're in the capsule soaring towards space?
I mean, equally emotional, I think.
Yeah.
We train for everything, and so when we're in that capsule waiting for launch, we're just running our procedures. You could almost, trick us and say that we were in the simulator and it wasn't real. But like in that moment of liftoff, when the thrust builds underneath you, like we saw it today, it's just hard not to be overwhelmed by the emotional experience, the excitement, the joy of that moment. It's incredible.
Yeah, I think we can't say it enough. This team really deserved this moment. They've been working so hard for this moment. When I heard that we got into terminal count, it was, I felt a sense of relief and excitement for them that I think everybody here did. You know, we really wanted them to succeed. We really wanted to see the launch today. And wow, I will never forget this.
Me neither. It was an incredible experience to be here and see that happen.
Yeah. Was there anything that was particularly surprising to you? Again, this is your first launch. What were you expecting?
I think we also had a nighttime launch for our launch. And so I think one thing you underestimate is how much it lights up the night sky.
Yes.
We were able to watch it all the way through that trajectory. We were able to see the boosters separate and everything. So it was just an incredible view. It's amazing how much you get to see of the flight path when it's at night and sliding up the sky.
Yeah, and I don't know if you noticed this, but we see the moon here, and the trajectory of the rocket looked like it was flying towards me. You know what I mean? I was like, oh my God, that's so poetic. It's so beautiful. I'm so glad we launched today.
Yeah.
Wow.
Congratulations to the team. It's incredible.
We're going to head over to Daryl, who was at the launch team. Daryl, you got to count us down through that, through liftoff. I mean, how was that being in the launch control center with them?
Well, Megan, it was something else. I got to tell you, you're looking live inside the firing room where Charlie Blackwell-Thompson is about to address her team after a whole lot of hard work and preparation to get to this moment. Let's stand by and listen to her now.
Comm check. But you can't hear it in the room. Can you guys hear me? No. Hey, Jeremy, can you see if you could turn something on there for the microphone? The press site can hear me, but the room can't. The room can't. You can hear me? Because the guys... I don't know what he's telling me to do. My team can't hear me, so I'm... Yeah, somehow the team can't hear me with the mic, so I don't...
He's here.
Can you guys hear me?
Pam
Oh, there we go. Is he ready for me? Well, for once, I might be speechless. So you guys know I have talked a lot about appreciating the moment that you're in, and we have worked hard as a team. You guys have worked hard as a team for this moment. This is your moment. It is not by chance that you are here today. So I want you to look around at this team and know that you have earned it. You have earned your place in the room. You have earned this moment. You have earned your place in history. You were part of a first. Doesn't come along very often. Once in a career, maybe. But we are all part of something incredibly special, the first launch of Artemis. The first step in returning our country to the moon and on to Mars. What you have done today will inspire generations to come. So thank you. Thank you for your resilience. You know, I said at the pre-test briefing, the harder the climb, the better the view. We showed the Space Coast tonight. What a beautiful view it is. So congratulations. So we got a couple of traditions here in launch control. And the first one is when you're in the position for the first time, you get a tie cutting. And so I have my Launch Director scissors. And I'm going to get my tie cut by a couple of legends that are here. And then anyone who wants their tie cut will be making the rounds in the firing room. You got your console chiefs if they want to do it. That's fine. If you want me to do it, you might have to wait a little while, but I'll stay all night if I have to. It'll be my pleasure to cut ties. So I'm going to take care of mine, and then I have one other presentation that I want to make this evening.
This is Charlie Blackwell Thompson, Artemis 1 launch director. She just got her tie cut. That is a tradition here at NASA. We just got to hear her talk to the team, and one thing that really stuck out to me that she said is that they've really earned their place in history. We're coming up on solar array deploy. Let's go on to Leah.
Thanks, Megan. And yes, we're here in Mission Control Houston, still monitoring the Artemis 1 mission and the first flight of Orion atop the Space Launch System. So far, we saw successful liftoff at 1:47 a.m. Eastern Time, all the way through separation from the core stage. We now have Orion and the interim cryogenic propulsion stage flying free. And we've just heard that we have initiated solar array deploy. So we are turning our focus to that. The spacecraft was running on battery power, but stretching these wings will allow it to stop relying on those batteries and significantly extend the time it can stay in space. So solar array deploy takes about 12 minutes. We have 4 solar arrays that we need to deploy and latch. These will provide power to the spacecraft on its journey to distant retrograde orbit and all the way back to Earth. Once these are properly configured, again, Orion will no longer need to rely solely on battery power. And we expect this to be done about 30 minutes after liftoff. Right now, we're 19 minutes since liftoff today. Orion is now traveling 17,175 miles per hour. We're continuing to hear good calls here in Mission Control Houston from the flight controllers monitoring the mission. A little bit about these solar arrays as we wait. Again, we heard the call that the deploy has been initiated. We'll hear a little bit more about that once they start to unfold. These 4 solar arrays generate 11 kilowatts of power, which is enough electricity to power 2 3-bedroom houses, and they have a wingspan of 63 feet. Just one of these 6.5 by 6.5 foot panels has 1,250 solar cells. So you're looking at a total of 15,000 solar cells. Now, we just heard the call that all 4 solar arrays have been released. So we initially heard the initiation call. That command had been sent. Now those 4 solar arrays are released. Again, this is about a 12-minute process. These solar arrays will deploy straight, and you're getting a live view right now. This is really exciting. They'll eventually be swept back against the vehicle prior to translunar injection burn to prevent any loads from breaking or damaging the arrays. And on the end of each solar array is a camera that will capture imagery for us throughout the mission, along with a few other cameras placed outside and inside the spacecraft to help us monitor and perform various other inspections. Of course, if you recall the Apollo capsule design, there were no solar arrays. We had fuel cells instead. So this design with arrays gives us the opportunity to stay in orbit longer since we practically have no limit to the energy available for use from the sun. Coming up on 21 minutes since liftoff. Orion is attached to the interim cryogenic propulsion stage. You can see those 4 solar arrays unfolding now. And again, Artemis 1 is a flight test. It's paving the way for a sustainable presence at the moon. Looking forward to the future, Gateway will be our space station in lunar orbit. And we have some similarities and differences in the solar arrays unfolding right now on Orion and those that'll be on Gateway. So like we're seeing now, these are deploying autonomously. The Gateway solar arrays will as well. And while these generate those 11 kilowatts of power, the 2 rollout solar arrays, or ROSAs, on Gateway will generate 60 kilowatts of power. That ROSA design is currently being tested aboard the space station. We have 2 new ones installed and a spacewalk conducted earlier today, preparing for another set. Coming up on 22 minutes since liftoff today, Orion and the interim cryogenic propulsion stage traveling over 16,800 miles per hour. The solar arrays deploying now are part of the European Service Module. It's comprised of 20,000 parts and components. The Service Module was developed as part of an agreement between NASA and the European Space Agency, or ESA. This is the first time NASA is using a European-built system as a critical element to power an American spacecraft. Coming up now, and 24 minutes into the flight of Artemis 1, spacecraft now traveling at 16,500 miles per hour around the Earth. We are in solar array deploy, and we have confirmation all 4 arrays are deployed. Coming up in a little less than 30 minutes is the perigee raise maneuver. And with our launch at 1:41 Eastern Time this morning, we are looking for a perigee raise maneuver about 53 minutes into today's flight. Again, we are now 25 minutes and 47 seconds into the flight, and we have a complete deployment of all 4 solar arrays. Orion's journey to the moon continues as planned. Again, looking forward to that perigee raise maneuver. That'll be coming up again at about 53 minutes into the mission, so about 27 minutes from now. During the perigee raise maneuver, the interim cryogenic propulsion stage will use its RL-10 engine to lift the lowest point of Orion in Earth's orbit. The current orbit is more of an oval shape than a perfect circle, and this burn will raise that point closest to Earth and make the orbit more circular. This will also include a checkout of Orion's systems and any adjustments to the solar arrays. It'll be a short burn, less than 30 seconds long, but critical to keep us on track, and it also prepares us for the next engine burn to send Orion to the moon. That's the translunar injection burn. That'll come up a little later, which is a longer burn, another firing of the RL-10 engine on the interim cryogenic propulsion stage. We caught a glimpse there of those solar arrays, and with all 4 solar arrays properly deployed, Orion's journey to the moon continues, and we've got more operational updates coming up shortly, but for now, I'm going to toss it back to Megan and Kayla at Kennedy.
Leah, thank you so much. Our return to the moon will be different than the last time. We plan to explore more of the lunar surface and learn how to live and work there. With more on our destination, let's bring back
and really The whole point of that is to use the moon as this proving ground. We're trying to get to Mars. We're trying to learn to live on other planets where there is gravity, where we're going to have to use resources there on the ground because we won't be able to bring everything with us. And by going to the lunar South Pole, by going to stay under Artemis, we're going to be able to start practicing that. We're going to perfect those systems, perfect those techniques and operations we need to do that so we can use the moon as that jumping off point to Mars and beyond. So that's why the moon. We're going to see Orion fly around it for the very first time in just a couple of days. That launch was spectacular. I'm still way too excited, but can't wait to see some shots of the moon from up close from Orion. So I'll send it back over to you, Megan.
Thanks so much, Dan. So right now we're actually joined by members of the Red Crew. You'll remember from watching the launch coverage that the Red Crew was sent out by the launch team when the launch team identified a small leak on a hydrogen valve inside of the mobile launcher. Well, now here they are. This is Trent Annis. Trent, can you just introduce everybody else here on your team?
Yeah, so this is Chad. He's our safety guy. And behind me is Billy. And he's the experienced hydrogen tech out here.
And the three of you guys really, I would say, saved the day today. I mean, really, you guys had to go in there to what's called the blast danger zone. You guys are specially trained to be able to do operations on the pad while cryo is loading. Talk to us about getting that call, being told, hey, you guys need to go in there. And it was the first time for all three of you.
Yeah, all I could say is we were very excited. I was ready to get up there and go.
Really? How are you guys feeling?
I was very comfortable, very confident in the test team and the procedures and our training. We did a great job.
Walk us. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
So how gratifying it must be for you guys, because you train for this eventuality, but don't always get to do it. Billy was saying that he's been a Red Crew team member for 37 years, and this is the first time he's been called to go into the blast danger zone. So I know for us, when we're training for all of these eventualities, whether it's a spacewalk or robotics operations, you really want to put that training into practice. How do you guys feel like it went today?
Amazing. I still can't believe it. It's surreal to me. It's just insane.
Yeah, kind of walk us through what you were thinking. So you get there and what, is it just like game time and you're really focused, or, you know, how are you feeling?
Yeah, I'd say we were very focused on what was happening up there, just making sure we knew what was happening. Because the rocket's, you know, it's alive, it's creaking, it's making venting noises, it's pretty scary. So on zero deck, my heart was pumping. My nerves were going, but yeah, we showed up today. I think as soon as we walked up the stairs, we were ready to rock and roll.
And they were telling us a bit about it while you were working on it. You guys were actually just torquing down the valve to prevent or reduce the leak rate or stop the leak. Is that right?
That's right. Just the packing gland. It was a little loose, so went up there and tightened her up.
You're probably still like in this, oh my gosh moment, like all of us are. You know, has it actually hit you, like the role you played today in making Artemis 1 launch?
You know, I still can't believe it. Like, it's, like I said, it's surreal and just amazing. I don't know about you guys, but
they're nodding along behind you for sure. Anything you want to say to the launch team? Again, this is a big day for the launch team, for you guys, NASA, but really the whole world. I mean, this is a historic launch that I think we'll all remember. Really.
You know, we had a lot of people here helping us out, a lot of teams, firing room. I'm sure that was hectic. And, you know, NASA, Boeing, all the other companies did a great job, and we're glad to be part of it.
One thing I always like to say is spaceflight is a team sport, and I think you guys perfectly demonstrated that today, right? Like, none of us could accomplish this on our own. It takes a really complex team. Nobody can be an expert in all of the systems, all the technology, all of the workarounds we might have to do to get a rocket off the pad. So thank you for the role you played in that team today. It's awesome.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Yeah, thank you so much, guys. I appreciate you coming by to talk with us. All right, it's now been about 35 minutes since liftoff of Artemis 1. Orion and ICPS are now free flying, so let's head back to Leah again to talk about how the journey is going so far.
Thanks, Megan. And it has been a pretty smooth ride so far. And we are now, again, like you mentioned, coming up on 36 minutes since launch. That puts us about 17 minutes into the until the perigee raise maneuver. That's going to be the maneuver that lifts the lowest point of Orion's orbit around the Earth and puts us where we need to be ahead of the translunar injection burn. The translunar injection burn is that really long burn that we're going to need to send us on to the moon. So we've been treated to some exciting views from the spacecraft today, including, and we hope to see some from inside the cabin, but we expect to continue receiving photo updates throughout the mission. It takes a team, though, to bring the imagery of Orion down to Earth, so let's meet them.
The imagery that we're collecting on Artemis 1 and the mission itself is preparing to carry humans to the moon. The Orion Imager team is going to be monitoring every aspect of visual spacecraft performance for the entire duration of the mission. The first time that we're going to be live streaming digital video from a spacecraft back down to the Earth from the vicinity of the moon. That's never been done before. What we'll be transmitting live streaming will be lower resolution, more compressed, because we have to fit it into a thinner pipe, if you will. Every one of these cameras is in its position where it is and it's configured the way it is for a very specific reason. We're going to be monitoring anything that we can see with the cameras for spacecraft performance. The imagery teams at NASA are composed of dozens and dozens of very highly trained, very specialized people, engineers, technicians, analysts. If we can see it, we're going to try and keep an eye on it. Imagery has been invaluable throughout the history of NASA. We flew cameras on Mercury, Gemini, Apollo, all of that stuff that we saw with the astronauts around the moon. It helps us detect the unknown unknowns. It allows us to see things that we didn't anticipate happening before. So when we do fly people on Artemis 2, we can have a high confidence that everything is working the way it should.
I love getting a look at those teams that we don't normally see, like the red team that Megan and Kayla just got to interview. A really big thanks to them and everyone that made this liftoff happen tonight. So we are going to toss it back to Megan and Kayla now at KSC. Again, we're about 15 minutes away from perigee raise maneuver.
Thank you, Leah. Yeah, we wanted to take us back into Orion and talk about some of the science that's being enabled by Artemis 1 today. So inside of Orion are 10 of these. So they're called CubeSats because they're tiny satellites. Essentially, they're the size of the shoebox when they're folded down, but then once they're deployed, they're opened up. They have solar arrays, things like that. That's when it gets a lot bigger. Now, these are called secondary payloads for this mission. Kayla, can you talk to us about what secondary payloads are?
Yeah, it just really means that it's not a primary objective of the mission. We're not relying on the success of these CubeSats for overall mission success. It's kind of a bonus payload, right? A chance to deploy these satellites that have different sensors on them and collect some awesome data to support other research objectives.
Yeah, and I know battery life was a concern for some of them, but all 10 were deployed, and scientists, I'm sure, are eager to see what kind of information that hopefully they'll be able to get. And they're just some of several research projects on this flight that will help gather data about the moon and more.
Artemis 1 is paving the way for us to explore deeper and deeper into space.
I think Artemis 1 is significant on so many levels. It is a new frontier to do science.
So the primary objective is to test the Orion spacecraft integrated with the Space Launch System.
And it is designed to carry out the boldest of the bold missions.
But it's more than just learning how to travel in space. We're taking a lot of cool science along with us on this first mission to the moon.
So as NASA plans to go back to the surface of the moon and then onto Mars,
we want to spend more time there, and that's riskier business. So the more we learn about the moon itself and the environment where we'll be operating, the better we can prepare. We have 10 CubeSats we call secondary payloads, which are small scientific spacecraft of their own that will each be conducting their own scientific mission.
All of these payloads in some form or fashion will help us going forward. They are going to be studying the moon.
And they're going to help us understand what is the moon made out of, what types of rocks, what types of regolith. What types of ice? What's mixed in with water that might be present?
One of them actually is going to attempt to land on the moon. They're going to be studying the sun.
Understanding and studying the space environment or the space weather.
Some different propulsion systems. These novel ideas will ultimately turn into the technology and the systems that we want to use going forward.
There's a lot of cool things going on between all these CubeSats that make up our secondary payloads. Additionally, inside the Orion, we'll be flying an experiment to study space biology.
Space biology is where we study the underlying changes that Earth-based biological systems undergo when they're in space.
Or basically, how does life respond to the space environment?
The level of ionizing radiation that you experience when you go beyond the Van Allen belt, so you go beyond the protective magnetic sphere that we have around us, you then get exposed to higher levels of ionizing radiation. So we are flying several space biology experiments.
We will take a series of materials,
plant seeds, fungi, the yeast cell, algae,
and ride along the trip. And then when it comes home, we can analyze how they responded to that environment.
This research will help us thrive in space. It will help us to go further and stay there longer.
In addition to space biology, we'll be learning about how to make astronauts more effective in the Orion in the future. An example of that is something called the Callisto Technology Demonstration.
Lockheed Martin built the Orion spacecraft for NASA, and we'll be flying a secondary payload that's a demonstration payload called Callisto. So we took the technology from Amazon for Alexa and the WebEx technology from Cisco, and so we built a digital assistant, if you will, a custom space-qualified Alexa.
Alexa, how does the life support system work?
Orion's life support system is the environmental control and life support system oracles.
And so this payload is a demonstration mission to show how astronauts in the future could use this technology as an innovative user interface.
So there you have it. I hope you agree with me. This is exciting.
I am just over the moon excited for the Artemis 1 launch.
The science we'll conduct on Artemis 1 lays the This really is the stepping stone for us as we take that next giant leap in space exploration.
So a lot of great science also happening on the International Space Station. I got to speak with astronauts Jessica Watkins and Samantha Cristoforetti while they were still on board about the research there that will benefit future Artemis missions. Jessica, Samantha, your primary job on the space station is to maintain the orbiting.
I see why you didn't take this one.
Or Crew 4 returns home. Jessica, can you tell me about one of the experiments that will help return us to the moon with the Artemis program?
We do a lot of experiments where we are looking into developing